traffic at Carroll. So we'll get started here shortly. All right. I'll call this meeting to order of the technical committee of the Plan Commission that's reviewing the solar ordinances. We'll have roll call.
Mike Pittman.
Here.
David Browner. Greg Copeland.
Here.
Ray Black. Warren Oxford.
Here.
Jenny Beverly. Here. Lisa Hammock.
Here.
David Ferguson.
Here.
Jean Rydell. Pat McGrath. Josh Klein.
Here.
Amy Williams. Lynette Anderson. Here.
All right. We'll go ahead and get started on a review of, I think our agenda, we have the solar discussion at the top, but I'm going to change the order just a little bit unless if no one has any major objections, and go ahead and move our discussion on the brewery, winery, distillery amendments up to the top. Amy's been working those. I don't know if you've sent them out, if you've had a chance to look at them, and if you want to go over those with us, Amy, and highlight.
At a higher level, just to keep us moving, and we can dive into any details. I will pass it around here for you. That way, this is what we just emailed out. So if you have that, it's the same exact document I emailed out a week ago. All right, so let me flip to the back packet. I have it in the order here. So this was kind of that second topic that was, I think, discussed by the Plan Commission that night, is outside of solar, talking about bourbon. So going in the opposite direction in some manners here, but it's really the storage of bourbon and those similar alcohols that produce the kind of the bourbon mold on things. So what we started to look at, and I can run through here, it's a couple pages here. The first would actually amend the definitions. And so the purpose of this is really to, again, separate out those things that are used to store mature bourbon and those types of alcohols from all the other, wineries, the other, the spirits and stuff and breweries that don't necessarily have that impact. So we would add in some definitions to yours, so you can see that strike through and they're all underlined. So brewery, winery, distillery, we're going to kind of, again, add in retail space, because a lot of those do have a little bit of retail space in there, but it's also going to then break it. We already have the artisan and non-artisan. What we are saying is that an artisan may have very limited on-site maturing of those spirits. Grab a chair right here for us, David. We'll grab David a chair in there. He can select leaving now. He decided to burn this too much. Just kidding. So the idea is those artisan ones, it goes very limited. It's more of like the tourist demonstration kind of maturing, which we'll get to in a second. And then the non-artisan is, again, you're going to have more on-site maturing of those spirits. But then we added in barrel warehouse. So this is just basically your rick houses, right? It's the rick house is either palletized or as a rick house or rack house throughout that process. So we've added in that. And then we've even clarified that with the VOC. So that is the compound that actually makes the gases that makes things turn black, if that makes sense, in simple forms. So we're even going to classify those between which ones produce that and not. So if you're storing a bunch of clear spirits, that's great, or wine, that's not going to have that impact. So if you go to page 2 on this one, we added in again rack houses and rack supported or palletized. Those are just the 2 different ways. Rack houses is how you like traditionally see them when you go into like tours. They look, stacked up nice and neat. Palletized is not where you're probably getting the tours. It's just pallets set on top of each other. And the only reason those came in for some of the building standards later in a couple of pages. So on page 3, we looked at the thing we would look at amending would be taking the non-artisan out of neighborhood business. So not making that a special exception there, just keeping it in ag or the general business. And then the barrel warehouses, if you have the VOC, so they can produce that black substance, that's where we're going to not make it permitted in any districts, but make it a special exception in ag and I2. And then the non-VOC warehouses would be permitted in I1 and I2, because it's basically just a big building with, trucks and whatnot at that point. And then it would be a special exception in ag, just because it had impacts from truck and traffic aspects. we went back and forth. I know when Warren and I kind of discussed some of this on ag versus non-ag, we'll have probably the same discussion with the next use in a little bit on whether it should be an ag or not. Sometimes you want to be an ag, you don't necessarily want them next to a whole bunch of stuff because they do have some impacts. So that's kind of advised. I'd rather see them in ag as a special exception. It has a public hearing process. All those adjoining neighbors get to voice their opinions and thoughts, but we don't put them in the middle of an industrial park. That's not going to be a good place for them at all either.
Why would that be?
In an industrial park, so if they produce that substance on them, again, if you put them next to all of your industrial buildings, they're like with a lot of high number of barrel storage, you're gonna get that black substance on all of your industrial buildings, and that's probably not a great use either, a neighbor. The best neighbors are no neighbors, which is more of your ag setting. When we did look at use standards then, we would clarify then in our ag tourism, we say that winery, breweries, and distilleries are prohibited use. We're adding in that barrel storage to make sure it's clear. That's not an ag tourism type of use. Then on to page 4, this is where we get into a lot of the amendments, and this is where we pulled in, again, previously this was not, barrel storage wasn't an issue in the county. It's something that is been more voiced now as an opinion and wanting to address it, put more regulations on it. So this is where this is coming from.
It's coming from, what brought it to our attention in particular was just across the county line a ways, there was a barrel storage application made in Jennings County. And they had to change their zoning and so forth to put it in, but at that time, they also did not have any detailed regulations on it. And that facility is going in somewhat under the radar. And there were some Jefferson County residents that were concerned of the impact on them, this will have no effect at all on the one that's going in Jennings County. It just affected our county area. So it brought it to our attention, and David Ferguson had looked into, as well as other counties that had dealt with this a little more, and brought some of the examples that they were doing. We've shared that among the zoning and with Amy.
And I've worked with some of the Kentucky counties on some of their regs too, with those that have a lot of some of the urban areas too. So some of that kind of gets pulled in, some best practices of also working with like the Distillers Association and stuff across the river. So it all kind of, this one is really revolving around that black substance that people call it bourbon mold, but it's not mold at all. It's actually whiskey fungus, and it has a technical name that I'm not going to pronounce because I'll get it. But the idea here is just with one, it was just the purpose. Number 2 on page 4 is just saying they still have to follow all their other codes. Like you got to go find your state, federal, all of those types of things. You've got to follow those codes. When we get into number 3, which is our development standards here, this really, a lot of this actually pulls from Kentucky building code. So Kentucky they do have a different code on rack houses and rick houses and pelletized than Indiana does. And I know I've worked with a couple of the building inspectors, especially on our half of the state, not as much north, that they like to even start to pull some of those items because it is much more detailed. So what we've started here with the maximum number of barrels, if you're going to be artisan, that's the small one, it's 100 barrels, basically on site. And so if you get to non-artisan, that's going to be 10,000 barrels. And then the large barrel warehouse is going to be 40,000, a maximum of 40,000. If it's not the VOC producing, then there's no limit on those. And so the idea there is trying to keep that within a realm. There's no defined number through science, what produces that whiskey fungus and what doesn't. These are kind of guidelines that some others have used. When we look at the development standards for them, the maximum height of those structures, those come straight from the Kentucky's building code on that. So the maximum height is 56 feet if it's not sprinkled, so they don't have automatic sprinkler system. 60 feet for rack supported, or 27 feet for palletized structures with a sprinkler system. So the separation between those buildings is again from Kentucky. So theirs is they require 200 foot of separation between any of those structures. between the rack house and any other rack house, whichever term you want to use, and any other structures, not including like fences and stuff. That's the idea. They do tend sometimes to catch on fire, so it doesn't spread as well. That's if they don't have automatic sprinklers 100 feet if they do. And then the minimum lot area, this is not from Kentucky building codes, it was kind of go back and forth and trying to look at some other examples and where you guys might want to land. Minimum lot area, if it's non-artisan, would be 20 acres, so you have at least 10,000 barrels. Usually it's a little over 1 square foot to store a barrel. If it's pelletized, plus then your other areas, usually it's about 20,000 square foot building to store 10,000 barrels. And so you need 20 acres. So that's, again, that side of the site. If you're gonna have a barrel warehouse, that's where you have 40,000. Up to 40,000 barrels, you need 50 acres. And if you're doing a non-VOC barrel warehouse, that's just 10 acres. If it's artisan, there's no minimum lot area. It's, think of like urban bourbon trail, you know, that type of thing. That it's more of just the attraction. And then setbacks, again, these start to come from a blend of sources, but it was looking at 200 feet from a right of way. We did use 230 feet from center of road if you don't have dedicated right of way, so it's just consistent with your other sections of your UDO. 300 feet for any structure that's used to store or mature the spirits that don't produce the VOC. And then the next two are with the VOC emission ones, 600 feet for any structure that has 101 to 10,000 barrels. And then it's a quarter mile, 1320 feet for any of them that have the VOCs that is more than 10,000 barrels. So again, there's no magic number on that distance. Some will say it's a mile, some will say it's 3 miles, but it all depends upon how many barrels you have in there too. So that was trying to kind of blend some of those.
Maybe a quick question.
Yeah.
It says these numbers are based on a parcel. What if they decide to put a bunch of parcels together? I mean, what's them splitting up a large 200 acre?
I mean, they subdivide it, you actually
Yes,
physically
and then
subdivide it,
somebody can get
record it.
barrels, you know.
Yeah, I mean, they could, if you put it all on, you're saying if they,
Like one in James County, so,
yeah, so you're gonna subdivide it to a whole bunch of the
11
barrel, like,
buildings or
you do a
whatever.
bunch of 50,000.
Yeah, or
barrel
whatever, and instead of 200 acre, they go in there and divide it by 20 acre lots or whatever.
Right, or 50 acres.
Or whatever
Yeah,
whatever that number is.
yeah, if you have 200, you can make it 4 50-acre lots, and then I'm
Can
just
it be
saying,
on per complex, or do we need to stick to parcel, or is there a way to?
we can't, all of those would have to go through, and this theory, and this proposal, they'd all have to go through BZA. So in my mind, there's some ability there to be like, okay, now we got like, 40,000 times 4, 120,000 barrels. That's a lot of barrels though, too. There's, and I can pull some like, I think it's how many million barrels that Kentucky has it.
James is either 11 or 7, I can't
I can't
remember.
remember the number of buildings. I wasn't.
They're either 7 or 11 on, they had, I don't remember which it is right now.
Back to this one.
So how many acres or parcels are those buildings on? Do you know?
I never looked at I didn't dig that deep, but I know it's on more than one farm.
Yeah, sometimes they are, like Jim Beam, for example, I know they're on a bunch of different parcels in there.
But it's basically one small area, and if we don't have any control, I guess the BZA would have the ability to see around what they're trying to
Yeah,
do.
I mean, that's kind of that is some of that theory, and when you get into some of those, again, we don't have the bourbon like Kentucky does.
We got it in Lawrenceburg is where
We have some.
that's where that's coming up from, Jennings County, and I don't I don't know if they would try to find a loophole, but
Well, if you have a large farm, you're gonna parcel it off, that would have, as a development, that have to go through commission, right?
Yes, it would have to be subdivided. It would have to, if it was more than one
So,
I mean,
gut.
all those parcels would have to be approved.
Yeah.
Yeah, so do we have, would the planning commission have to do something a little different as it is now, if you subdivide things out, we have a plan, so to say, of, if it's gonna be developed or if it's just gonna be large acres
We can
out.
put some language, there was, I'm trying to think, of one of the counties in Kentucky, when we wrote some of their languages, that it's either that, you know, if it's that farm or contiguous property that's owned, it's under the same ownership or operation, counts as the same. We can put some language like that in there if you want. I don't think that's an issue,
So if
but
you put continuous, that would,
like, I think it's that, yeah, it's that contiguous, like, whatever, if it's touching it, it's own ownership or operation.
Can we eliminate C barrel warehouses completely from Jefferson County, so we don't even have to worry about black substance?
So, again, I'm definitely not an attorney. My opinion is you can't exclude a use from your county. You're from your jurisdiction. You can't say, you know, you can't come here, whether it's an apartment or single family house, like it's not extreme, right? Or anything else. It's, everything has a home and a place. Or those adult businesses, right? Or some may want, some may not want them. So it's putting a process so that the public can have their opinions and make sure that all those findings of fact are voiced. And that then your BZA, based on the 6 criteria for a special exception, can make those, you know what I mean, determinations. But it's, you know, it doesn't affect the value of the adjacent properties, is there significant impacts? So they would need to show us kind of yay or nay.
I'm not familiar with this at all, honestly, at all. So this may sound like a silly question, but how far did the black jump?
That's like no one has like a set number.
Okay.
I feel like I want to go out and like test that, right? It seems like they test that. Cause like, my understanding is that like the fungus kind of spores are carried in the air and it just depends how,
Okay.
where they go. Like if you drive down by, through Bullitt County, Beam is right there and you can see like the interstate signs have black soot on them. They can be pressure washed off and stuff. So it's not like it's permanent, but yeah, dang, that's all. And some of these later in this procedures tries to mitigate some of that. So if you kind of look at number 4 on page 5, it's that mitigation plan being required. The judge owner, they just have to submit a mitigation plan as part of that special exception application that shows that how they're going to mitigate that black fungus, whiskey fungus, if it occurs from structures, and we put within 1 mile. That's just, again, kind of trying to be not overly, you know what I mean, onerous on that, but want to be somewhat realistic. So they have to give a site plan of all of those structures that are within that mile, and then it has to be maintained at all times. And they do have to do a development plan. And right now it says it has to be, that development plan has to be submitted concurrently with the special exception application.
so in that, they're gonna put a plan together, and if there's black mold on a person's house, they're gonna put in part of that plan will state how they're going to eliminate that problem.
Yeah, so I know like some of them in Kentucky and areas we've worked, it's like once a year they'll send the power washing crew around and they power wash everybody's houses for free or whatever it may be.
But it will have to specifically.
Yeah, it would
that.
say like what they're gonna do.
That sounds good.
And what are the state fire codes on these burial houses?
So that's where the codes in Kentucky are a little bit stronger than Indiana's, and so that's where like some of this max height comes from on page 4, and the building separation, that comes from Kentucky code, even though it's not our code, but
Stronger.
yeah, we don't like ours. I don't know anywhere in our state code that we talk about like rack houses, brick houses, in terms of separation between those structures. Indiana or Kentucky talks about it, 200 if it doesn't have sprinkle, if it's not sprinkled, it's 100 if it is, so that's where we pulled those in, these come from state Kentucky code.
These would be commercial buildings, so on
Yeah, they would still
top
go
of,
to
on
state.
top of whatever our regulations are, before a building permit could ever be issued for them, they're going to have to do a complete plan review with Indiana, with the state. And the state may have them requirements through, the building side. They may also have some IDM requirements that they have to meet as well.
Yeah, we didn't include in here, Kentucky does make them almost like, do a little mini moat around them, you know, for fire protection, so that, everybody's remember that a couple years ago, who was it, that little fish or something in the stream.
Yep.
So it's like a containment area. I didn't include that in here necessarily. It was more about trying to make sure,
But that's not a bad idea.
and I mean, I can pull that language again from state statute on that one. Yeah, it's saved
But
off.
we don't know if IDM already has requirements.
And that's where IDEM's they're gonna look at like erosion control and that sort of thing. I don't believe that they have that, but,
No, well,
that I've ever seen.
Environmental, like one at, Kentucky, when it, not just the fire, but when the one collapsed, and that's the one I think where most of the wildlife were damaged. It wasn't the fire one, it was when, I don't know if our state has have that kind of a plan in place or not.
Would you like to see a provision added to where
Yeah, I can
Kentucky
add
on
that
the
one.
both side of it?
The building code. Okay,
And I'm wondering if the 1 mile, I mean, should make it 2 miles, 1.5 miles? I'm just thinking 1 mile, we don't really know how far this stuff
Well, a
goes.
little bit I did work on it, 3 miles was about this far, and it was.
that's the furthest I've ever seen anybody say it's traveled, but
And it
that's
was,
pretty
a
far.
lot of it is just airflow and currents and where it's actually placed and how much woods is around it and those kind of things, but 3 miles is about as far. As I ever,
Yeah, I was trying to like balance because you've gotta have, again, when it sounds like you've gotta have a lot of bourbon to get that far. Like, we're not just talking about a couple like a couple brick houses out there. You're talking about a significant number of barrels.
I visited the Aurora Lawrenceburg area there where they have quite a bit of barrel storage back in, pretty congested area as such. And it absolutely shows up in the vicinity of the barrel houses. You can see the black on the houses and so forth. It appears, and I assume they're not washing all the houses out far away from it and leaving the ones up close black. But when I saw that, and you get 1,000 to 1,500 feet out from it, you see a very quick decline. But it is going to vary considerably from one location to the next, depending on how air moves around and so forth. And so there's no objections. If we need to have mitigation plan that goes out a greater distance, we can consider that.
I would, but. I mean, I would, but.
I'll go with, I'm looking for.
What do you want to take it out to?
I'd say 2 or 3. I mean, I don't know why we wouldn't, since we don't know how far it goes and it depends on where.
Mhm.
Where the location
The
is.
only owners thing on there is saying, like, we have to say they have to have a site plan that shows the general location to all of those structures in the mitigation plan. That could become onerous.
Mhm.
That was one reason I tried to keep it, you know what I mean, scale back. Maybe it's, they have to mitigate within 3 miles, but they like to show the structures within a mile or something like that. For, BZA, so they can at least see the masses of it, but that's just a
Should
suggestion.
we put something in that says or further depending based on the BZA?
Yeah, and that would be fine too, if you guys want. At least 1 mile, but could be up to 3, at the discretion of BZA or something.
What's thoughts, is comfortable with that approach?
Like I said, that depends on the location.
Mhm.
Sometimes it may
All
not.
right.
Yeah, if it's flat, it's gonna travel a lot farther than it is.
And we've not had any, it doesn't mean we won't, but we've not had any inquiries. There's nothing that anyone's aware of barrel houses currently looking at any location in Jefferson County, but
And
after Jennings, we wanted to get that addressed.
And the runoff protection from Kentucky state statute, it just says earthen dikes and or containment trenches shall surround each barreled spirit storage building to contain the total quantity of liquids warehoused, plus the design overflow volume for fire protection water. Basically, your little moat has to be able to hold all the bourbon, plus the sprinkles. Yeah,
that's a lot.
it's gonna be a party, I guess, at that point. Brandon has to be calculated to discharge from the fire let me see, where do I there? Whichever is second, then they have to basically, the capacity shall be designed to contain the flow for a period of 20 minutes. So I think it's the idea of not letting it all just free flow in. If some gets out slowly, the fisher is happy, they're not.
Do we have a consensus on adding the moats? Everyone in agreement on
So
that?
I'll add that to it too. Okay, and then we'll do at least 1 mile up to 3 at the discretion of the BZA.
I mean, you know, if you had a chemical site, you'd have to put your tanks in a diked area and it would be so much, plus like you always put in a certain amount of rain, but fire waters.
Okay, I've got a question on, going back to site development standards. This is just so we don't have confusion later on. And it says the minimum lot area for the RC brewery, winery, distillery is not applicable. But then on the next section, when it talks about minimum setbacks, it says 300 feet for any structure used to mature, store, distilled spirits that do not produce the VOC emissions. So I think that might be confusion if somebody comes and makes an application.
Usually because it doesn't have a minimum lot size.
Right, because it already says 300 feet in this section, but it doesn't say it.
Yeah, so there's not a minimum, in my mind, there's not a minimum lot size. But you still have to meet all your,
You
like,
still
you
have
still
to
have to meet all your
right.
parking requirements, and there will be by default some sort of size they're gonna have to do. So if you wanna write in something that's just like, I mean, 200 by 200 in rough numbers is an acre. If you wanted to put something like 2 acres, that's fine too, but some of these can go, and this isn't probably applicable here because you don't have the downtown, but think about like the urban bourbon trail.
Right.
They're in like,
Close.
yeah, and those would be a little bit different too. So if you want, we could just put like 2 acres just to, it's gonna by default have to be probably about 2 acres.
I just think it might be,
Then it's just not
it would
confusing.
define it a little better for somebody.
Yeah, I just don't wanna put like 10 or 15 when
Right.
it can be something less.
I didn't want to make them in thinking they can do 100 by 100 and.
And it's like, well, but you still have to set back.
Yeah, right.
Okay, so that works. So I've got that change, adding the spill runoff protection, the 1 to 3 miles at the discretion, and then adding the language about if it's the same ownership or operation that's contiguous, it's gonna be treated as one.
And we are requiring them to submit the development plan application at the same time they permit the, yes. So we have complete development plan that gives the details on that.
Yeah, and the purpose of that is then you can use, that can be one of those conditions or written commitments that they are complying with this, or else they have to come back to BZA, not just, because development plan is a PC approval. So it still needs to be approved through, you know, that PC function. I think it's administrative.
So, yeah, it's, I think it's.
But it's a function of the PC, but the BZA can use it as a commitment. Okay, that sounds super.
Any committee members have any other thoughts on the barrel house? Have any comments from the audience? On barrel house regulations? All right. We will be having, we will make these available, sometime we get them in a more finished form after, planning commission visits them again. There'll be some time there, they'll review them, and we'll see if we can make them, available online before, we have the public hearing, and there will be a public hearing that will be, give another opportunity to address these as well as to what we're having this evening. We probably will have another public meeting on the solar, depending on how long we get along yet this evening, but in all probability, there's going to be another solar meeting before we would have a public hearing meeting on it as well. I don't think we'll be addressing the brewery, winery, and distillery at our next meeting on this, so that makes sense. All right, we'll move on to the solar.
Do you want to go back to the first real quick, just
Yes.
to highlight?
Yeah.
I am gonna hand new copies of this out. There's just a few little things I'm gonna point out. No, I'm gonna grab a copy, I printed it out. I received just kind of one set of few minor comments, and I'm gonna point those out that are highlighted as we go through some of these, just to make sure everybody's aware. So these are the topics we went through last time. It included term change, power and communication lines, glare, signal interference, sound level, fencing, stormwater, and then the maintenance, damage, repair items. So we made through all those last time. It was red line last time. I've continued to red line, but for the sanity of you guys looking at this, I have also highlighted gray, anything that changed between the last meeting, just so that you can actually see what changed between last meeting. Because ultimately, when it goes to planning commission, it would just be one red line, like, I want you to be able to see what's going on. The yellow highlights, it's just like last time in previous meetings, it's just questions I have for you guys, so, we can run through some of these as we go through them. The term name, there's not really anything to note there. As we went through power and communication lines, again, you can see those gray highlights are what's changed between now and last meeting. What I did wanna know is when we talk about, if they're going to have, if the project owner has any sort of communication or power lines in the right of way. So I'm not talking about like in a private parcel, do you want that approval to come from the commissioner? And a permit from the highway department? That was probably my guess, one of the commissioners. I figured that was the appropriate body to approve something you wrote as the commissioners. And then the highway department, again, if required, they have a lot of areas permitting, I just wanna make sure we get them covered.
We have a right of way permit now, so,
Okay, perfect, and that comes through the highway department, right?
yeah, it goes to them first, then it comes to the commissioners.
Okay. And so I'll just write as required instead of required on that one. So those are two right entities, that's good. So the rest is kind of what we talked through, discussed. I'm not gonna go through all of them for the sake of keeping, flowing to the next packet here. But we can go through any of them. The one change that was suggested is on II outside the SES fenced area. We already had that those have to be buried at a depth of 48 inches below grade. The highlighted part was what was added with an underground warning tape installed directly over the line at a depth of 12 to 18 inches. So that's the so someone starts to, they can locate those and they don't, I guess. You don't inadvertently dig through those. So that was the suggestion that came in there. There was also a question on whether that depth of 48 inches should just be all depths. 48 is being pulled from that state, model language. So that's up to you guys. I did not change the 48 inches depth. I figured that was I wanted to ask you guys about that, but did add that highlighted to the II. That with an underground warning tape installed directly over the line at a depth of 18 or 12 to 18 inches. So
It is difficult to get to a depth much greater than 48, but the 48 would also give a depth to where if a water line is going in that is more of a rural nature to where it's a 3-inch or 4-inch water line, that you would be able to have enough frost freeze protection depth and still stay above the line when you were going in. And then, that's the main area was wanting to look at as far as other expansion that would take place in the county of additional water lines or so forth, that they would have some clear markage where these were and cut down on the risk of digging into those and still have enough depth that you'd be able to clear them with other utilities that's going in.
and this is
The
just
communication people, when they come in, they're plowing those in normally and they're not usually getting much over probably 18 inches or.
and this
couple
is
foot.
whether it's in the right of way or not, correct? Or do you want that to just only be in the right of way?
We're making the 48 outside of the fenced area.
Right.
Right.
Okay, I was making sure we talk about the right of way.
No, I'm talking about the
So
outside.
anywhere this is, we just have the markers,
Mhm.
the warning tape.
Okay.
Okay. So, in one below on the exemptions, if they're gonna do any other design alternative that's through the highway department, I'm saying that's a good, they are the ones that typically go through the design aspects of things on that aspect. So that was all on the power and communications on page 2. It was just bringing in what we discussed on the glare, so you can see those few edits that are highlighted gray. And the same thing with signal interference and sound levels, so. It was just changing primary to commercial since we changed the name of that, so I highlighted that since last time. Fencing was a big topic last time, so you can kind of see what those changes were. Again, the idea was we were saying wildlife friendly and woven wire prohibited, and barbed wire is prohibited unless it's on the substations. The option that under IV that is highlighted yellow is an option. That was the second thing I wanted to, why I kind of gave you guys those. There was a suggestion of saying that the perimeter fence has to be chain link fence and not give them the option to do like a solid or a fake fence. I don't know if you guys have thoughts or ideas on that. I put that in there. If so, it would change, like, instead of if a fence chain link is used, we would just specify the material shall be. That, and then all of these 1 through 8 are basically trying to there was a big discussion last time about just making sure it's a commercial grade fence. Was the purpose there. So here when we're referencing the ASTM, those are kind of standard specifications basically for various materials, but it's basically your standard commercial grade fence. It's nothing over and above beyond that. It's the standard items for that. So I thought the easiest was just to specify that ASTM versus trying to say that it has to be, you know what I mean? All the specs out here, that would be like 8 pages long. So those are standard, nothing insane. There should not be anything insane. The number 2 I did highlight because one of them I was sent over was for the fence fabric, and I didn't know if you wanted to allow fence fabric or not. Sometimes I know that can just get torn up faster than anything once one windstorm comes through. So, that's up to you guys. So it's kind of that option on chain
For
link.
long term, I don't think fence fabric is the way to
I
go.
don't think so. I think it just gets the maintenance for like the project owner and it just gets torn up pretty fast.
The only thing I see on the fence side that we need to specify, because the standards listed won't necessarily require it. The ones that are listed here is that it should be all perimeter fences shall be chain link with top rail. They do put them in without top rail at times to where they just run the tensioning wire at the top. But the top rail, if you look at any place where they're putting the chain link in for a long-term installation and so forth, you see the top rail.
Yeah, okay.
It strengthens the fence substantially compared to
I thought I
just,
had one in there for top rail and.
is it elsewhere?
But I don't, I'll make sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I thought one of them, the number was for the top rail, but we've got fence tension wire. I'll make sure.
I know last time something was mentioned about, rust. Is this compatible so it's not going to rust?
Yeah, so like these are, they're galvanized or they should not in theory rust,
Right.
so.
And it's, the specs call for the 9-gauge fence versus 11 or 11 and a half that you would see at a house or so forth. So it gives a good spec on the fence. And seems to be what, when you check the locations that I visited in the state, what's being used there. With the exception, some of them in the state do not have the top rail on them. And we had conversations with fencing companies at some length as well as to what their recommendations were on it, and followed those. Those were some of the standards came from. Discussions mainly as well as this wildlife friendly sounded good as far as bringing it up off the ground. They said you basically create security problems. It's easy if you got a foot off the ground for anyone to crawl under it basically or scoop out. They said the problem is they would guarantee you that the small wildlife will find a way into the fenced area. That if you have concerns over needing to do something there, you're better to add some type of short, small underground culvert, maybe 12 inches in diameter, that wildlife could travel in and out, but not people. But they said their problem is usually just the opposite. Unless you're willing to dig down in the ground and put the fence down below the ground a foot or two or pour the concrete, you're not going to keep the wildlife out.
And we do prohibit that, but so the question is, do you want to require it to be chain link? And do you want to allow the fence fabric? Those are, I think, the two things I don't know, because we did prohibit the wildlife friendly last time.
Because we were talking about the fabric being in lieu of evergreen type of.
I never think the fabric is a screen, it's just or the slats either.
What I was talking about is the plastic that gets woven in between.
Oh, the slats.
The slats.
So those are slats, yeah, I
Those
would
are
call those slats a lot.
Yeah, the fiber,
Yeah,
I just think you're just asking for.
and we'll talk about that in the second chunk of the buffering and stuff. Whether slats could be counted or not, I think it's proposed that it's not. But we can get there in a minute. So I guess, do you want to require them to be chain link, or do you want to let them be whatever fencing they want to provide, as long as it's not wildlife friendly and woven wire and it doesn't have barbed wire? Right, like those are prohibited, but.
I think the chain link basically needs to be the minimum.
I think that's what they're gonna do.
That,
I mean, most are
I
gonna
don't
change.
know, when I've checked with the fencing companies, when I've looked, when you're looking at a fence that you're wanting to have a life of 30 years or plus, it is difficult to find anything with wood posts, woven wire, or other applications that will meet that. Now, we do have the language that if a company came in and they're wanting to suggest alternative of, a much more decorative or durable type fence, we can give them that ability to do that as an exception if it's part
Yeah,
of
that would be
it.
that option language that's highlighted, and then we would change the
You
next.
know, there was
one.
some thought or conversations of, well, there's a link look too commercial compared to putting farm wire up on it and so forth. But it just does not appear that long-term that wood posts and woven wire will hold up.
Well, wire is a lot easier to find over the
Yes.
years than,
Yes,
but I've never seen one that tall.
yeah.
So what are the opinions?
Any other thoughts on it?
Feel like same length?
Yeah.
Okay, so I will update that, and then number 2, we'll kind of get the material and probably already brought into one section, so it's not confusing. Okay. So then we move on to topic 7, which is stormwater. Basically here, the biggest thing was adding that definition of the drainage board, which is the drainage board or the commissioners if the drainage board is not proposed. So that should take care of that. And then number 8, the only changes since the last meeting were primary SES to commercial SES. So, any other thoughts?
Does the audience have any comments on what they've heard this evening? Stand up for us and
Very favor.
yes, thank you.
The drainage board
Mhm.
or commissioner.
If it's not established. It hasn't been established yet.
Do
that's
we
all.
have a drainage?
Not yet. I think it's in the works, correct, David? So until it's established, we need somebody to do it.
So what's your commissioners, what's your specialty or to be able to make those determinations that a drainage board would do?
Well, right now, when there's not a drainage board, it's the commissioner. That's the way the state statutes run. So if we're trying to, we got a draft of a stormwater ordinance, which would establish the drainage board. So we're in that process because we had about 3 sentences in our old ordinances on stormwater management. So we'll move forward with that.
Okay, so I'm just concerned because
Well-
you're a commissioner and I'm just looking at what do you know about drainage?
Well, I would know enough that I would go talk to somebody and figure out what's right and what's not. Because I would,
And it's
Usually farmers, so.
from this ordinance perspective, the whole drainage ordinance is another thing
Right.
going on, right? From this ordinance perspective, all we're doing is we're following what is already in established. We're just defining what's already established. We're not questioning or going through that process. You're doing that independent of this whole
So you're
ordinance. in general.
changing the ordinance to go from the drainage board to or commissioners.
If it's not established.
So you're adding that language.
Correct, because right now it would go to the
Okay.
drainage board, which then, yes, by your
Does not
ordinance, it
exist
would
at
be
this
you.
time.
I'm sorry.
Right now it's saying
It's
it
a moot
goes to
point,
the
really,
drainage
but-
board that does not
Right.
exist at this time. They're in the process of putting that drainage board together.
Whether we change this or not, it still does the same process. So it's just making sure someone's not confused at the moment.
If we had a drainage board established, they would not be able to choose whether it was a commissioner or the drainage board that gave the approvals. It would be the drainage board.
I understand that, but what I'm saying is that you don't have a drainage board, so it defaults to the commissioners.
Correct,
And
and that's,
I think that that's a concern that
And
I'm
nothing-
asking.
Issue larger than, like, whether we change that or not, it still is gonna go to the commissioners, because this UDO cannot control that.
commissioners rather than this
yeah,
ordinance.
there's
This
nothing
is not
the planning
controlled.
commission can put in this ordinance that would make that different.
I understand. I'm just going to the next step, since that's how you're changing the ordinance is to add the word or commissioners.
It's not established by local ordinance, and then,
Yeah.
sure, before that ordinance gets approved, there's, here's that.
Dave, is that state statute right now? If you do not have
You don't have a drainage board.
Yeah, so,
So,
Commissioner.
I mean, it's nothing that we're doing, that's just the state law, that if
right,
you don't have a drainage board, I mean, it's already present, it's there. I mean, if we didn't put it in or nothing, it would still have.
it doesn't matter if we put it in or not,
It
it's
would
still.
still go to the commissioners because we don't have a drainage board,
Well, and that's the concern that I'm stating.
but that's state law. I mean, it is.
Yeah, and I get that concern, I totally get that, but I guess, I think there's a different process to it.
Yeah, the
That's that.
process you'd be addressing is to encourage that there's a need to get a drainage board established, and that's a little bit.
We need qualified people to make those
That's their
decisions.
problem.
Yeah, I'm,
And they're working on it.
And they also have the option to be able to bring in whatever engineering staff or outside that they would need to advise them on those issues. Any other comments?
I think everybody agrees we need a drainage.
All right.
Wait a minute. What's the difference between commercial or industrial? They said they're moving from primary to commercial solar energy. What is is that? the
We
state
just changed the term
Yeah.
from primary is what we had been referring to the large solar installations. And they've been, primary was a term that had been used elsewhere. And commercial is much more understandable term.
Well, under the Indiana code, they're classified as industrial sites. Indiana state code classifies solar as industrial site.
So Indiana code, I'm gonna pull it out because
Yeah.
I'm quoting myself sometimes.
Like, print it off.
Blah, 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 blah. Jump on. That's fine. So their section refers to this commercial solar facilities or solar systems. Within the, I give you, within 8.142.
This is in section 61.1-4-13.
I'm trying to get on my, that's for property taxes.
No, state how it's classified.
Yeah, I was trying to hold what's used, oh, something.
Oh, wait, that's the farm, that's the property tax. I'm sorry, you're right. I'm trying to find the one that I
Okay.
have. I got on the paperwork, so it takes
Yeah.
a minute to find it.
So like, if you look at 8.142, it's entitled default standards for commercial solar energy systems. So a previous term a lot of people used was primary versus accessory, you know, because it's the primary use or accessory use. All the suggestion was is to mirror the state's term on that, so it's not saying, hey, you could call them just solar farms if you wanted to.
No, it's not a farm.
You know what I mean?
It's not.
I just, you could call it anything you wanted to as long as we define it that way. So we're just falling in line with what the state's calling it, so there's not confusion.
Well, I did want to give that leeway to it not being considered as industrial, because that's what it is with all the, you know, the chemicals, the other things that have to be looked at. It's more chemical, industrial.
And we will talk about, we do talk about in the next one, the new ones for tonight. Which number is that? We do talk about the districts. It's number 12, topic number 12. So tonight in theory is 9 through 16. And that was topic number 12 of which districts it should be permitted in.
Or regardless of what we call it, as long as we know which
Correct.
our ordinance apply to, it's going to be the same. And I understand the sensitivity of not wanting to refer to them as farms.
Yeah.
There's nothing.
And that's why we call them systems.
Systems
Because
as
they're
such.
system, you know, that sounds like it's a system versus, a farm. But
Any other
that's
comments from the
like
group?
going with the states.
You ready to move on to number 9?
Okay, so number 9, I'm gonna hand out a fresh one as well. I did get one set of comments back and I've added these in little like call out boxes, just because I was like, then we will already have them written down for everybody to see. 6. I can count 6, 1, 2, 3, 4. Just because I didn't, then I won't have to just repeat all of those to you guys. Okay, so this goes through the second half of topics that we had. As we kind of start to run through these. Let me grab my heavy, you know. All right, so first topic. There we go. Sorry, getting organized here. The first topic is road, construction management plan, like a road use agreement. this was discussed at the last meeting, a little bit, in terms of, the idea is that making sure like roads aren't, closed for extended periods of time, right? That you can't get in and out of your property or businesses. And then that if there is damage to the roads, that we just have an agreement, they get repaired. Some communities have gravel roads, but I think those obviously get damaged a lot easier because it's gravel when you have heavy trucks on those. So some of these were pulled from other examples across the kind of state, but the idea with this is that there, if you have any road closures, for more than 10 minutes, total closure. So again, that allows like a truck to stop and drop something off, or you know what I mean, something of that nature, but it has to be approved by, and I put the Board of Commissioners, to make sure that is correct. Or NDOT if it's a state road prior to the occurrence. If you're gonna close a road, you have to get the Board of Commissioners to approve it, just like you would if you're gonna close it for a 5K race or something like that. And that the project owner has to notify all those properties within 200 feet of that closed road, and notify the school districts. So again, it's just the idea, of making sure that if you can't get to your parcel, that we at least know what's happening and we can make plans, and that the schools know their buses can't go down that road. And then that they just need to put a public notice in the paper as well. So that's kind of that process. And that you just have to have a maintenance of traffic plan, like an MOT plan with, that's approved by the highway department. Again, I'm gonna close this road, I know, kind of like NDOT does, right? They have their little detour signs that you follow around and you still have access to everybody's parcel. The road use agreement, so that would be, that the project owner just has to have a road use agreement that's approved by, and I put the highway department, I don't know if that should be you though.
Highway department.
Highway department, okay, cool. Prior to getting a building permit, basically. But I wrote down, and you guys can change this if you know it, that they don't have to have that road use agreement to get their development plan approved. In my mind, it's more of like the technical details of, you know, working that out, but, that was one of those questions at the bottom, that's number 2. So we already answered number 1, highway department should approve the road use agreement. Should the road use agreement be acquired with special exception or development plan, or can it come just before you get a building permit? I don't know if you guys have thoughts on that. In my mind, it's more the details, like, oh, I need, there's something, I'm gonna fix it, right? We'll figure that out.
And you would think the highway department would say, no, we don't agree.
Right, and you can't say, oh, I'm gonna damage it and not fix it. Oh, okay, I don't think anybody's gonna say that.
It's going to be much more pertinent to submit it at the time closer to the actual road closures and so forth
So,
than to because until they get a construction schedule nailed down, and
no.
they're not going to know. They would not be able to.
Yeah, they're
have
together
that
in a route
place
trucks in
ahead of
and
time.
out or something like that. So
Right.
that's up to you guys, but that's how it stayed. That's what's highlighted right now.
Mhm.
I do have a question.
Yeah.
Number 3C, designated roads and routes that can be used by anything weighing more than 1 ton.
1
Well,
ton's like not, my
okay.
car is like 2.5 tons or something.
Yeah, I was gonna say that.
So that came from another example center. I thought 1 ton was kind of low. It should be more like 10 tons.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cause that's more like a commercial vehicle. Like my husband drives a 350, that would just like.
Yeah.
So I agree with you on that. 10 tons or something more of that is a better threshold, because that's more of a heavier truck.
Yeah, more like a work truck.
But we do, on number 2, though, we, back up just like here, is that it does have to be, that agreement has to be maintained, right? Okay, you can't not follow your agreement. And then in that, we did specify number 3, what has to be in the road use agreement at a minimum, so who the point of contact is for the project owner, identification of all those public roads that will be used to transport things. The designated routes for any vehicle weighing more than, we'll say 10 tons then. So if you're gonna have a heavier load, what roads is it going on? And that's really just to make sure that your road can handle it. If it was something constructed with a small base, you might have issues. Staging or holding areas, so that's one of those issues that Warren talked about last time, is just making sure you're not clogging things up with just trucks sitting there waiting to drop something off. The process for moving oversized equipment or a large number of vehicles. And then F is temporary improvements that are necessary. Again, if you have a road that was, say, a gravel road out there, right, and you're putting this heavy, large equipment on it, it's not gonna probably hold up in the long run. So there might be needed temporary improvement to be made. And then an obligation to repair any of the roads that they basically break. You break it, you buy it kind of thing.
With drainage, well, I went and looked at a solar place or solar field over in Illinois, and they're in the construction phase of it. And they were just putting in temporary culverts and stuff wherever they wanted to, I don't know wanted to, but where they needed to. But what it looked like to me is there's a lot of drainage issues because they were running off the culverts, they were getting, it was the ditches that were along the roads were being plugged up and
Yeah,
so technically the road was fine when I drove down it, but I could see issues. Does that define the drainage also when we
so
say?
I would say your drainage is gonna default to your drainage board. That's the entity, once it's established, that has purview over drainage within the
But
county.
this is not really, I mean, it's road drainage. Would that fall under that or would it fall? Because I could see an issue with if the road can't, if the ditches don't allow the water to get away, you're eventually gonna have road problems down the road.
It's gonna undercut it and. or
So
whatever.
I didn't know if we can make this wider to cover from roads, you know, get the ditches covered in this.
I mean, that's up to you guys. I do think we wanna make sure that that gets pushed to your, in my mind, once your drainage board gets established. That should,
Or would the county department, highway department already consider that in part of the?
they're probably doing maintenance on those things anyway right
That's who
now.
does the maintenance in our county are the road ditches, is the county highway department, but that was the only thing I saw in
What
Illinois.
else we put like obligation to repair, public roads, and I put and infrastructure, drainage, public roads, comma, drainage and other infrastructure.
And road drainage infrastructure, maybe, road drainage.
Road drainage is what.
Yes, road drainage is what I'm concerned about.
Public roads,
We'd
I don't know.
we'd want the highway department to be able to address fairly quickly if there's a place that, road ditch has gotten plugged up and it's backing water up over the road or backing
Right.
water onto someone else's property. And it's gonna be much quicker if we can get the highway department to address that with them to get it corrected.
So it's an obligation to repair all public roads, road drainage, infrastructure and other infrastructure as required by this. So that we, again, if you know, clog up a culvert or your truck runs off the road and collapses the culvert or something, yeah. Okay,
I have a question.
yeah.
All this is tying together in my brain. So what we're looking at here, the public road use agreement, is this part of their development plan? Is it gonna show some of this in there, or is this different?
It would be separate from like, so development plan, purpose of development plan is solely to say, does it comply? Right, show me where you're putting this and this and this, do we meet the setbacks, do we meet the, whatever the requirements are?
Mhm.
You have a decommissioning plan, that's separate, and then you would have a road use agreement plan. The question is when do they submit this road use agreement? Like, they won't know all of this stuff at the beginning, right?
Okay,
So that was why I put it, that it doesn't get submitted with your, you know, special exception or your development plan, it gets submitted, you should have it done before you get a building permit, right?
okay, that's where I was getting confused. I wanted, because I'm thinking on the 3D with the staging and the holding area. I just didn't want that to be some language and say, yeah, we're gonna have it. I would.
I mean, if you make them do it up front, that's what it's gonna have to be, like,
Yeah.
we're not gonna know.
Right, so I'm saying when they submit this, I don't want that just to say, we're gonna have it. Unless I'm thinking completely incorrectly, I would think when they submit this, the agreement is going to show where that staging and holding area is going
Yeah,
to
if
be.
they need a staging or holding area for like their trucks and equipment, they'll identify where that is.
But that won't be originally, that'll be
Correct.
That'll be before they pull the permit.
Yes, okay,
Right.
yeah, yeah.
But after they're approved.
After they're
yeah.
Yes,
approved.
yes,
Correct.
yeah.
And so I could, but again, not required to be submitted with or prior to, it says development plan, I'll put special exception at or development plan so that it's very clear. It's get it approved before you figure this out, because you know, you won't know these details yet.
Yeah, and I just wanted to make sure that was part of that was gonna actually be shown on a diagram or a map or something of this is where the area is gonna be, the staging area is gonna be.
They would do that, and again, that's where they would have
I
to,
wanted to make sure
designate,
that's.
or where the staging or holding areas, they would have to identify those.
It would be on a site plan or a set of construction drawings typically.
Yeah, probably like some sort of site plan.
That's what I wanted to make sure that.
So it's probably on one of their parcel boxes somewhere, 'cause
The only area I question a little bit back. If I understand, there's got to be some trade-off on the day-to-day. Everything can't come back to the commissioners. It doesn't physically work. But I wonder if this initial approval should be done by the commissioners instead of the Jefferson County Highway Department. If it's done by the Highway Department, there is no opportunity at all for public review of it or comments on it, as there would be as if it was done by the commissioners. David, you're far more familiar, Commissioner Bramer, than I am on how that process normally works.
Just to specify too, the road of use agreement, that's not talking about like road closures, like road closures go through a process with the commissioners. I think that has to stay with the commissioners. That's what it's a normal process. The road use agreement is the stuff down.
I mean, in theory, the Highway Department's gonna bring it to the commissioners for approval regardless, aren't they?
I would think so, yeah. I look at,
Did you want to put the commissioners there, David? It's up, it's totally up to you guys.
yeah, I mean, I think he's right, it will be in the process, it will go through the highway department, they will look at it, but in the end, it'll come to us for approval.
So just, are you gonna be right both of them or go
Yes.
with one of them?
Yeah, I would propose.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's fine.
Us.
Because I'm concerned that there wouldn't be an opportunity to address if there's a particular issue.
So you saw highway department commissioners
Okay.
to the, just specifying it's not, doesn't have to be submitted with or prior to a special exception or development plan application.
Real quick, so if there is issues or during the construction phase, who is to police those issues? Is the county superintendent supposed to drive down there?
Well,
I mean, really, I don't want to put everything on the commissioners and you guys have to. I mean, that's typically who looks at the roads, whoever's ahead of whatever township. If we have a road washed out or whatever, that would be the same process, correct?
yeah, but I mean, the highway superintendent's out running
Yeah.
the roads now, so yeah, I mean, it would be. And probably start with, and then we would go.
If we had to.
Yeah.
I'm also gonna change it to the 10-ton limit and then add the road drainage infrastructure to that list. Anything else? There was a question on the bottom. I did not include this, but it was one that was, and some of the stuff that was sent on is any sort of surety bond for the repairs. I didn't include anything on that because I thought, I don't think there's probably a need for that right now. Again, it could be all flushed out depending upon, you know, what you're bringing in. But I didn't include anything for that, but left it just to make a note of that.
What are your thoughts on requiring a surety bond on the road repairs?
Which one?
The road, on the road use agreement, correct? That's
What,
what-
that we don't have it on there right now.
I'm asking.
But that's the question is. I
Commissioner
didn't
Kramer, what's
include
your
that.
thoughts? Should there be a surety bond or?
I don't know.
And if so, how would you determine what amount?
That's why I was like, this is a little too.
If there isn't, I'm sorry, if there isn't, how does it stand now? That there's a repair needed, that
Then they're in violation
will.
of their.
they will repair it.
But yeah, I mean, in that agreement, it would basically say you're gonna repair it and here's how many days you have to do that. In my mind too, I mean, if they're in violation of these or the decommissioning plan or whatever else, you're in violation then, and they get issued a violation and you proceed accordingly. If they're under construction, it could be a violation of their, depending how it is issued, could be a violation of the building permit even.
Any other large construction projects, what's the typical, like a Honda plant, like it went in Decatur County or whatever, I mean, what kind of, did they have to do anything of that nature?
I don't know about the.
Or any other.
The ones in particular, I'm trying to think of like, we work with Hardin County and they've got, you know, a battery plant, blue oil's going in there. And I don't know
Did
if they've had they had a lot of dust issues. But because they have their own concrete plant on site, so they're creating a lot of
Is that a
dust.
standard to have that bond?
I don't know, honestly, on some of the examples that I did look on this, some of them had them, some of them didn't, but the ones that had it were kind of generic. I mean, it didn't specify, you know what I mean, this amount and this, that, and the, the goal is nobody messes up the road, right? And if they do, they just get fixed really quickly.
The teeth of it would be though, everything has to have teeth or it doesn't matter.
And that's
So
where you
if
prevent your
there's
violations.
teeth, but what I'm getting at is, even if you don't do a bond, the teeth of it is, they could lose their permit.
Yeah, you could do that.
If they don't stay compliant, they're in violation and.
Yeah, your ordinance is every day is a separate fine, so it's every day that they don't comply, then you would, just like you would if it was someone who had an illegal use, right? I'll look to, I don't know, one of your, recent enforcement's right, but you send out the violation letter, says, sorry, you can't do this. You have so many days to stop or comply, if not, you'll be issued these fines. And it's a daily fine that compiles, it's not just like, you're fined $100, come talk to me later, it can be, state statute allows up to $2,500 per fine per day.
And I believe we'd have the option as well to, issue, if it's in violation and causing problems, we could issue a stop work order completely.
That's right, depending how it's attached to your
How it's
building
attached.
permit, yes, there's options on that, so I think you could have enough avenues in mind willing to not have to worry about the surety, that's why I didn't put it in. Again, if it becomes an issue, it's something that you can require in there.
I think just to be safe, put it in there to.
Put the surety bond in? Okay.
I think so, but how do you decide the amount?
It comes around like.
Well, I think the
That
highway
depends on the
department,
size of the
right,
project.
well, I
Then we
mean,
could-
you could put it per mile. You
What
can put it in a certain, and it depends on what the road is. If it's a blacktop road, well, we know about what that costs and we can come up with a surety bond for that. If it's a gravel road, well, we know what that, I mean, gotcha.
How about if on the
Probably
end of
need that
G-
language in here, don't we? We probably need that language in here, don't we?
That's, so how about on the end of G, I put a sentence, cause that says obligation to repair public roads, road drainage infrastructure, and other infrastructure as required by the UDO. I'll put another sentence that just says, this obligation may include the requirement for a surety bond for repairs, and leave it at that. But may is up to the I mean, it may, because it's up to the discretion of this being approved, so they may, your ultimate approving it. Commissioners may require that if you want.
Let's make it shall. Let's make it shall. And it takes that burden off commissioners down the
But then
road.
we need to put something unless it's not necessary, like you're saying, there might not be a need.
I'm saying,
Right,
Well, if there's not a need, they'll be able to address it by the amount of the surety bond.
right,
It'd
that's
be
what I'm
much
saying.
lower.
I think we need to put in there that how we're gonna come up with that, not necessarily an amount, because amounts,
Or just who's going to
Change.
determine the amount.
how they're gonna determine the amount.
Determined by the highway superintendent.
Yes.
Something like that.
Okay.
Go to what kind
I
of.
just wanted to ability you guys to let them out without having an issue of variance on
Sure.
it, like, you know what I mean?
And when is the bond after the finished construction, is that released or is it for the whole project?
No, it would just be
No, it'd be
construction,
during
it's construction only.
Yeah.
All right, for the construction period. Okay, I'll add something in there then. Okay, dokie. Did I answer that question? Anything else on this road use section? We get to move to
The
next.
only other thing I have, and it would probably fall under another section, but I don't recall seeing it there. When I've checked during this construction process and other areas, and someone mentioned it a minute ago, is some type of provision to be sure that we have a way to enforce dust control. And it's not just, some of these areas had quite a few gravel roads and they had trouble with dust control there.
Yeah,
But they also had trouble with dust control on the fields themselves during
you
the
guys need to
construction.
be more of the sites, because your roads are pretty much all paved, correct? I mean, that are out there.
No, we have gravel roads as well.
Where.
We have a lot of gravel roads.
I guess. You don't have a lot of hilly areas necessarily.
We have both.
Yeah, we have.
We can,
I mean, one of the largest areas of commissioners here on a very regular basis is people cheering for and wanting their gravel road paved because of the dust problem. So it is
we got a truck down.
it is a huge issue if the dust, there needs to be some type of dust control.
I would probably think you just need to put that in this section,
Okay,
for like a provision for dust
all
control.
right.
Make that like the next list somewhere. Okay,
Okay, I have a really quick question. Who actually looks over the construction drawings. Because we don't have a county engineer on staff, do we? So we have an outside party.
Yeah.
Between our insurance. And then, so I know like when we're at the power plant, we have to water roads constantly, it's required. So is that something that we're gonna require?
I think that's what this is, what are the provisions for the dust control on public roads, on the roads, and then we can address the site dust.
Okay.
So like, we're literally told at what temperature you start, what temperature you stop, and you know, I mean, it's very regulated, so that's.
Yeah, I think, and in my mind, that, again, this gets vetted by your highway department and your commissioners, so we require them to specify that.
Can you submit that information to her?
Cause like at 32 degrees, you better not be watering any roads, it doesn't matter if it's dust, you know, it's just they don't water the road, not the next, yeah.
Yeah, do you wanna just specify that it should just, they have to include provisions for dust control, or?
Yeah, include what your plan is.
Yeah, so they have to include the provisions for dust control on all roads. And then
Yeah,
they
we
can
need a
tell
plan,
you the
what
specs
their
on what
plan
they're gonna
is.
actually do that as. And then I will specify, probably in our I'll make sure somewhere we have dust control for site.
For the public, I'm moving on through these without stopping, or we're not going to get through them this evening. But as we get to the end this evening, if there's a particular topic that someone wanted to comment on, we'll give an opportunity for that as we come back to it. But if we stop for comments all the way through, we're just not going to make it as far this evening as we need to be.
Okay, are we good on that one? Okay, the next one was development plan or site plan requirements. So currently, a development plan is required. Right now, we're specifying that, okay, they're required to get development plan approval. We also specify they have to get their stormwater permits, drainage permits, and location, like building permits, shall not be obtained prior to that development plan approval. So again, you can't go get a building permit before you get your development plan approved. We did specify that that development plan has to be submitted concurrently with a special exception application. Just as a, make sure everyone's aware, BZA doesn't approve development plans, but they can use that development plan as part of their approval, if that makes sense. Because that is not a power of the BZA, that is power of the planning commission, which can be delegated to staff.
Should we change for the solar, specific solar only, should that language say that the development plan needs to be approved by the planning commission? Because in the UDO, it says the administrator can approve it or the development plan commission.
Right, and I think that's still fine in my mind, because a development plan isn't like, it's not discretionary. I mean, you're going through your rules and saying, all right, did they meet the setbacks? Yep. Did they meet the height requirements? Yep. Did they meet, one of those is it a permitted use or been approved by the BZA as a variance or a special exception? Yep. So you can make them go, and we had that discussion like when we did a UDO, you can make them go to the planning commission, but if it complies, you can't deny, right? So I mean, if it's a permitted use or been approved by the BZA as a use for a special exception, they comply with all the standards of the whole ordinance, you can't deny it. I mean, that's not, it doesn't work that way. And so that's why administrative is sometimes good, because if it's not a point of discussion, then why, put it out there for discussion? Now we allow it to go to BZA, because by state statute, if you have development plans administratively approved by staff, again, it's a checklist, it's black and white, and there's not gray in it. You have to have a process for the applicant to be like, he just doesn't like me and being a pain in the, you know what, let planning commission review this. Or we are not seeing eye to eye, let the planning commission go to this. So there has to be a route for that. But I think it's also good for staff to have that route. If there's just, you know what I mean, an applicant that is not working well with you and is kind of, you know, hard to work with, just let them go to the planning commission then. Who basically doesn't agree with anything you're saying. So I'm okay, I think, and personally, I think I'm okay with it, because it's not, there's no discretion in it, do they meet all the regs, yes or no? If they don't meet them, it's a no, if they meet them, it's a yes. So there's no public hearings on this anyway, you know, or required by state statute on those. But again, that just put the tack on the staff, but even if it goes to planning commission, somebody's gonna have to review it and tell planning commission if it complies, right? So it's the same thing. So, but we did specify it has to be submitted concurrently. So at least you have, the purpose of that is then going to BZA hearings, you have those documents, you have their site plan, you know what's gonna be built. And they can use that as a, okay, this is approved, if it is, say it is approved, otherwise it wouldn't matter. If it is approved, then you could say, and it's contingent on this site plan, you have something you can lock them into. So that's the reason of that. And maybe I'll specify in here, you know, BZA doesn't approve development plan. Just to be clear. Okay, and then so, and a lot of our items, we've moved the things that have to be submitted in applications, the applications themselves, just so that it's not a statutory thing, but we went ahead and included it here. Kind of consensus from last time, so property lines, rights of way, all the zoning of that and adjoining properties, locations and setbacks of all the arrays and other structures, equipments, or power communication lines, locations of fences, including the fence materials, and that, so that you can see if it complies with the fence requirements. Required screen ground cover, including those planting types and screening materials. Again, it just, you get shown information, do you comply with the code? Driving areas of service roads within the site, floodplains, wetlands, protected natural resources, and then they have to give you topo. And that's pretty standard of, it's a 1 foot, intervals of 1 foot if the parcel has less than 5% slope, or 2 feet if it exceeds that. That should be,
Are those backwards?
that should be, yeah.
That's what I
I
thought.
was like,
That's what I was gonna ask about
different,
that.
should be 2 and then 1. Like that would be good. And then that documentation showing the max height, layer, and the aviation protection, the signal interference, and the sound level requirements. So again, all I did on these is I went through all of the requirements of the no, and said we have to basically show you're complying with those. And then all of their information, basically that's requested or required to show compliance. We'll put something in here about dust control too. And then the question that I received, you see that was the new question at the bottom of your little page on the box is, should the UDO require that the development plan be a written commitment of any special exception approval? So that was the idea of saying, the purpose of having them done, submitted with special exception is you have a site plan, you know what they're doing, right? It's not just a blank parcel. You can use that as a condition of the approval, right? You follow, it's approved if you follow the site plan, right? If it does get approved, if it doesn't, then it doesn't matter. So do you want to make that a requirement, or do you want just the BZA to determine that? Does that make sense? I think in my mind, I kind of left it to the BZA, but I understand that I think the concern was, will the BZA know that we do that? Or will the staff know?
I think from what I'm seeing, the current one we have, the plans are all conceptual. So things can be changed upon construction. So I think it needs to be part of the development plan.
Right, and usually where you just can't get any more intense, you can get less intense, right? You can get more intense.
Yeah, so it's got, I think that, and I didn't see anything here about getting an engineering firm to review the plans too, and have to pay for another company.
That's in your procedures, in chapter 7.
So then we're making that change. Just put any other thoughts on that? That the development plan will be
Or at least the site plan part.
Site plan part, I
Like,
mean.
you know what I mean?
right.
The site, at least the site plan.
Yes.
It's just maybe outlining, if it's this parcel, we know it's only gonna get here, it's not gonna take up this much, or you know the areas under which this is gonna include.
I think there needs to be a survey with legal descriptions on these site plans.
So a lot of times your building permits, you're gonna at least need a deed or legal description of your building permit typically. Is that what you guys require?
You're gonna need what?
Like, do you require a legal description or deed for all your building permits?
No.
No. Okay. So they might, I mean, and they should have a deed, obviously, and that is part of your, any BZA application, you guys require the deed. They might not necessarily have flexible whether legal description is on that deed and how old it is. You know what I mean, depending upon,
I'm thinking of the tower that we've had. They have the description of what's being
and usually
in
they're
there.
parceling that off, or
Yeah.
that's part of their lease is that. I'm just trying to think functionally. If you have a couple hundred parcels, would all of them have an actual legal description? They'll have a deed for sure. And that would be required, that's required on any application today, your BZA, they have to give you a deed that's in that list of your applicant, unless you guys have changed that. They have to give you your deed, just for, you know,
Right.
But what are you saying, Jane, like,
a legal description, I don't know how to.
like,
At the
like,
lease area.
right, so
At
like
the
when you're
lease
looking at the site plan or the development plan, that, just say the site plan, then like, you can see, instead of having a parcel like this, then you're gonna be able to see exactly what is.
Dallas are gonna have a separate legal description of just the lease split, because they're gonna lease the parcel and then they wouldn't, so it's not gonna like, so when cell towers come in, they are very specific usually, and they just want this little postage stamp, you know what I mean? That's pretty standard with them, and they go parcel it off, or they basically parcel it off in terms of only a lease,
Yes,
not.
but they're not leasing the parcel continually, if I understand correctly.
Which-
They have a period of time that they lease the parcel, and then once construction starts, I believe they are just leasing with inside the fenced area, if I remember correctly.
And I would
Is
say
that-
that probably
that
across the
correct?
board that varies
Yeah,
between
that's why
companies.
there's an Alta survey after the project gets built, the Alta survey is provided.
Yeah, I'm gonna guess maybe does that vary between companies even? No, it doesn't. Okay, so it's pretty standard. You're gonna do an Alta after it's constructed, and then based on wherever that Alta is becomes your leasable area. But they're not gonna have that. I don't think they're not gonna have legal descriptions for that. Your cell towers are usually, again, because it's from postage stamp too. That's a little easier. We're talking, functionally, I wanna make sure you guys don't get stuck in somewhere that's navigate. That's all I'm trying to do. Deeds for sure. I think you need deeds on every single one of them. In my mind, that's where your site plan comes in. They draw in, this is where, the make something up. We have 100 acres right here on this lot, right? This is like wetlands or floodplain, so you're not gonna be there anyway, right? And maybe they draw, this is my area with, you know, where it's actually gonna have solar facilities of some sort. Yeah, when they come back in for their building permits and you can't have it built up here where you didn't show it, right? You gotta stay within
All
that.
wetlands, all classified have descriptions.
But then I'm more worried they might have more like meets and bounds and not a legal description, right?
It goes into those programs.
But in terms of the deeds, like, I don't know if every deed is gonna have a legal,
They're surveyed, so they're surveyed off into, I mean,
but at the time of application.
Yeah.
I don't know if they'll have, that's all, I wanna make sure that you guys aren't, we know we can actually get
What are you
something.
worried about?
This
I
is.
mean, I don't know,
Oh.
from your standpoint, you know,
Okay,
we're
you
getting
had a legal
ourselves into
description of
stuff.
just the leasable area, I just don't know if they're gonna, if people are gonna have,
So what if they don't? I mean, I guess,
then it would be a requirement, you'd like need a
right,
variance for that.
they wouldn't necessarily go ahead and get it before you're saying they wouldn't want to move on. They wouldn't want to go with that expenditure to have a survey and do all that
Especially with all
without.
the survey, those are more expensive than getting legal description together, all the surveys are definitely, they're more expensive than just standard survey of that, when we got them.
I do know when this, and I know what you're saying, but it is nice when the cell companies come in and they're applying for a, we can see exactly where everything is, we got a better handle on what we're dealing with and how it affects and everything. I mean, it is nicer, I will admit, when they come in, it's all tied to, and we see the money part of it's tied, blocked out, but we see the contracts, we see how it's
Right,
all
like
done.
it's specified in their leases,
Yeah,
that
it's
they
just-
have that in there, I
So
know.
we feel a little bit of a sense of comfort when they come to the BZA there.
Cause you know it's not gonna move
Yeah,
from that area.
yeah, and we can see it and we can work through it and how it's all tied together. It's just a little bit better of a package. And but if that's, I know we're looking at a large, compared to 50 to a K.
That's where, like, when you're doing a cell tower, it's one,
It's usually 100 by 100 or something like that.
it's a postage stamp almost, like when you look at the whole
The
camp.
way I'm looking at this is
Versus-
presented by ownership of individuals. They're throwing it all into one
One
thing,
bucket of
but
things.
technically it's the individual lease agreement with this one person. So it would be broke down from that individual. That would be their site, that would be their site.
If they are, that would
Because
be,
they're presenting parcels and they're presenting their deeds, so they should be able to present a survey with that site, with that leased area.
That would be a lot easier if you did it that way.
I mean, I've looked at some of these, Farm Bureau had one as far as legal consideration for solar. And the terms, there was a survey that they suggested, as far as legal descriptions to be done.
Just from experience working in the office, nothing this large. But to simplify it, which just make it easier to understand, and when you're looking at a large project, it needs to be simplified so you can understand what you can see the whole picture. So if you had your small puzzle piece and a small puzzle piece and a small, which is a parcel,
Yeah.
parcel, then you could see, like Jenny said, you could see this owner and what they're getting squared out, this owner, they're getting squared out. And then if you have those individuals, and then if you have your large site plan that showed the whole thing, then it's easier to see what you're doing, small, down to this area, to
Yeah.
this area.
and in my mind, it's like your site plan is giving you the drawing, right? It's just not a surveyed legal, like Alta survey. It's not the legal description that's parceled out by the
To me,
fences, but it's a drawing.
discrepancy. It's a discrepancy in what's being presented and then what's actually gonna be done.
You're afraid like if the box is
So
here,
I'm
the
not,
box moves,
you want me to approve this, but it's gonna change in the meantime. I have a problem with that.
And or you don't, from what I can, just from looking at the other one, it's hard to see the current site plan. Exactly what I've got here, because it's not drawn out by this particular parcel. It was targeted,
Is it a development plan though, application, or is it just your special exception? Like,
this is just the site plan that came with the.
okay, so not your development plan house, again, has to show all your parcel lines and your setbacks from every parcel.
We don't have,
Right, and that would be included, it's just not gonna be the legal survey, it's not gonna be the legal description within the boundary, I guess. But in my mind, like, the site plan gives you enough grounds, and then if the BZA approval is contingent on that site plan, they can't change it. It just doesn't have the legal description yet to go with it, so I don't know. It's up to you, I mean, again, ultimately it's up to you guys, but I feel like your site plan is gonna show you it's 300 feet or whatever, I'm just using that as an example.
Well,
It's X feet from this parcel line, and then when they come in to get their building permit, if it's 10 feet closer, you're like, nope, that doesn't work. You know what I mean? It
Well,
needs
I'm
to
looking
be
at it as a county thing too, okay?
X feet.
From assessor's office going out to their assessor, they know by meets and bounds what they're assessing and what's gonna be in that solar field.
And maybe
You
you
just
can
give them the
require that
description,
later.
It's just,
Because if they'll have that at some point in the process, yes, that, like, for assessors, that makes some sense, like, but they're not gonna assess it when they pull the building permit.
you are saying the survey legal description would need to be part of the development permit process.
I said that, so currently the deed is required, which, again, most deeds are gonna have some form of a legal description in them nowadays.
I
It's an old
think that,
parcel.
I don't think that we should require the survey for the initial special exception
I
application,
agree with you on that.
but we should require the survey before we issue the building
When you say
permit.
survey, are you meaning an actual Alta survey, like, or are you meaning a site plan?
I think it needs to be something that describes it to the extent to where what they show us on that plan does not change afterwards without
Right.
there being a record as to
Right, so
how and why.
There's a detailed site plan that shows all your
A
setbacks.
conceptual drawing
And then,
and then it being no. I think, but I don't think that it's reasonable to have that submitted as part of the initial application.
yes, I agree,
But before the development plan would be issued, yes,
after your special exception approval, you're saying,
yes.
because you don't want to spend that
Because if I understand correctly, even after they get the special exception, they cannot move through with any construction to not start until they commit the development plan, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
They cannot get building permits until their development plan is approved.
And I assume if they ask for a special exception for such and such area, the development plan will need to be submitted for that entire area, not to be able to break it into, well, this is phase one or this is phase two
Whatever's your special exception, you need to turn that in
at that time. Okay.
concurrently, but if
Are you
you
comfortable with
want
that?
a,
If we get it?
you definitely would have a legal description, like a deed for your whole parcel, but it's when do you want the smaller one? I'm just trying to balance, like.
I think it
making
needs to
sure
be done at the time of the development plan, not as built later as such. I mean, if you do it as built, you know, it's difficult to tell,
Could you-
did they have the setbacks and, well, now the fence is already in, the setback wasn't actually there and.
Well, if it's in, the setback doesn't mean development plan, go tear it out and move it.
Well,
I mean, that's,
I understand.
you don't get a feel, like, you don't get
Yeah.
you're out there saying, sorry, buddy, it was supposed to be
Mhm.
X feet and you're 50 feet off. Move it.
The cell tower, so basically built is drawn for the final.
And you're,
Yeah, and basically
Building
that's what we
drawings.
commit, is built is drawn, which, that's what Josh goes out and takes a look at. And I mean, that way he knows where things are supposed to be. What we have is conceptual plan now, which can be changed.
whatever you're turning your building permit should be what they build. If it is not what they build, then it's not. You should be saying, hey buddy, like, move it one way or the other. So I guess that's where I'm a little confused, but I get the need to know exactly, I wanna know where the fence is, right?
Yes.
Is the biggest and where everything is situated inside of it. But at what point will they actually have a legal description or a survey of the versus like an engineer's drawing of that to begin with, so I don't know.
I think they need to have the legal description as part of the development plan.
Legal description of their fence.
I mean, they're gonna have to have some type of legal description to know where to put it as such. When the fence guys go out there, someone's going to have to have had it surveyed out and
Yeah,
laid.
you know, have your boundary
So,
survey for sure
Yeah.
by then. I mean, you would need to do your boundary and then you would need to have your setbacks. That's what I'm saying, is it drawn on that boundary survey and then later they do an alta, like what exactly is, you know?
I
fence?
probably don't know the difference between an alta and a boundary.
So the boundary is finding my corners, you know,
Mhm.
and drawing those in. The alta goes a step further in terms of, a little bit more of the research and it goes into some of the ownership and the history that's a lot more intense. I know when we get altas done on some projects, they're usually about 3 to 4 times more than just your typical boundary survey, which is, I'm gonna put a pin in there and I'm gonna, or locate the pin if it's already there, and I'm going to survey that. Which is a stamp drawing too, the boundary is stamped still. Alta has another level of research in terms of some of the extra things that go into that, with especially easements or.
Jenny, you have more expertise on this. Which would you be comfortable with? Is the boundary survey sufficient?
So I think you're gonna have boundary survey when you do construction, because you're gonna wanna make sure you're on your parcel.
Parcels.
The office survey also includes utilities.
Yes.
Yeah, that's more this
Yeah.
inside, yeah,
It goes into another level of detail, but a boundary is just my corners.
yeah.
Which is,
Yeah, it's with
In my mind,
inside,
we
your
wanna know.
utilities, your sewage, if are all located within that area.
and for your purpose, I think you just wanna make sure you know where it is on the site.
Well, when it
Not
gets
all the other
recorded at the
stuff.
recorder's office, I'm assuming these leases get recorded at the recorder's office.
no
We're not
idea.
taking the whole
Doubt.
deed.
I don't know, I mean, I don't know that answer. If they get recorded, I would doubt they do because it's a private agreement.
I have seen some.
Yeah.
And it's the whole legal description. If you're leasing something, you need a different description. Yeah.
I think they're gonna
They are
redacted and stuff
But
like that.
that might, but that's at the end of the process in my mind. Like, once you've built it, you're probably gonna have you're gonna actually add built up your office to where that fence is.
Well, I don't know where it needs to go, but I think we need legals. I don't know.
No, that's what I'm just trying to make sure it's balanced. I don't, it's up to you guys. I
Yeah.
wanna make sure
I-
you don't run into a roadblock later. You know what I mean? That causes
I mean,
you
it's all new, so
Better
wherever,
now.
you know.
There's several elements to the drawings. I mean, you've got your inverters, you've got your panels, you've got your, various.
Well, before Josh approves it, we need that legal.
He's gotta know where it's
Yeah,
going. He's
yeah,
gotta know
right.
how firmly on the drawing.
X feet from this and it's
Yeah.
this and here's the,
So it's not just the fencing, it's gonna be what's inside of that.
but you get a building permit, you need
Yes.
all of that information, 100%. And by then, that's where you'll know where, you're gonna know where all of that's located. And that's what I'm saying, like, if it's supposed to be X feet from the property line, you can get out there and it's not, you're like, okay, well, it's not, you gotta move it, right? You're building it to whatever your building permit says, just like a house. If I build my house 10 feet closer to the property line, when I do my your foundation inspection, you're like, gotta move it.
I think it would be easier though for the BZA members to see it in some detail.
And I agree with that. That's what I'm just trying to make sure we're all the time. I think it should be shown on a site plan, but do we need a separate legal description and ultimate survey at that point? I think you could get that eventually, right? For your saying accessory purposes and stuff of that nature, but I don't think you need that further developed. So you need to know where it is though. You need it on a boundary and showing where that is.
Yeah.
Then my mind is plenty more boundary survey, so then drawn on your boundary, on your parcel.
Say it again.
It's probably, it's a site plan, it's your boundary of that, and it's drawn in on that, it's not then resurveyed and you don't have an alt on that yet until it's, I see where you want it eventually, but for BZI, I feel like that might be, it might be hard for you guys to get. That's all. And I don't want you to start getting requests for like variances on all of this stuff. But I do think you need to know exactly where it's going within that site plan. So I think you definitely need the you have your boundary and then it would be located within that. Just like what you get probably for, I don't know, the next small ones to come in or whatever it may be in your houses, you know what I mean? You have a
Site plan, yes,
You have a site plan that shows exactly where it is on that site.
yes.
If they present an
I think that's what
exhibit,
we got. I mean, I think that's what, I think you're saying, we just need a site plan.
Right.
They're not gonna be.
And that's where it's
they show the.
where is blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, but we don't require a
Yeah,
legal
location
description of
setback.
that, of where that house footprint's going to be at that time. We never actually require that on ours. You know, it's a little bit different than this fenced-in area that's a separate lease that is going to need to be described at some point. And it's,
Say that one more time, Warren, sorry, I wanna make sure I can.
well, we do require a site plan and they measure out where they think the house is gonna be.
Exactly,
But we don't require that they actually have a surveyor survey that location of the house footprint
correct.
and
That's
write
where
a
you're
description of it.
You're
and
exactly
stuff.
where I am now.
That's,
You wanna know where the house is located, but you're not making them survey.
well, I think we at
Yeah, you
least
want it
need to have
on the
enough
side.
detail that it can't shift.
100%.
Whereas
That's where
on
we.
a typical house site plan, it may shift quite
Well,
a
it
bit.
shouldn't if it's on a building permit, unless that building permit's amended and it complies. But what I'm saying, so we require on this site plan that, or your development plan, it has to show the locations and setbacks of all solar arrays and all other structures, equipment, and power communication lines, so. From the inverters,
Showing
panels,
setbacks,
the
that's
fences
probably gonna
to,
be sufficient.
I don't know if there's a restroom out there at some point, you know what I mean, like a little, or a little, whatever it may be, all of this has to be shown on a site plan. It's just that you'll have a boundary, right? You'll know where the boundary is and it's X
So let's,
from that. You won't have a legal description of just the fence yet.
If they can show us 50 feet from setbacks from property lines, they should be able to at least give us an approximate of how many feet are within that leased area.
Oh, I think that would be, that's fine too. I mean, I think that's doable. That's just a quick calculation. And I would imagine, so we can require, I don't wanna say square footage, thanks, area within the fenced area. We can have them give us that calculation for sure.
Yeah,
I just want to,
just so it's showing on that site plan,
It would-
that we know.
exactly, and then if it is whatever, 0.23 acres,
At least we're
okay,
getting the approximate acre.
you know how much it is, correct? But you can also know, when they come in for building permits, if it's not X feet from the property line, shows it should be X feet from property line. It's just, you're not gonna have a separate legal description of just the fence. You'll have.
Yeah, like an exhibit of some kind of site plan showing their feet, yes.
Yeah, and then even from the accessory, you say, I mean, in simple terms, it's 100 acres, you have 83.24 acres is within the fence. Go,
Yeah, no,
like,
no.
that's easy enough.
Okay, yeah.
That's why make sure we get to the right endpoint, but we have the right tool, that's all I'm trying to make sure we have, so terminology just doesn't get out of, like, it may cause issues later. So we were trying to get in there to show exactly where all of the locations and setbacks of all solar arrays, other structures, equipment, power and communication lines. Let's show where everything is on the site and how far it's from from setbacks. And we can add in the area within the fenced area,
Okay,
square footage or acres.
all right.
All right, super. This is what this purpose is, get it figured out now and not like when you have, while you're trying to figure out an application. Okay, any others on this one then? So I'm adding in, to the top, just specifying that reminder that BZA doesn't approve the development plans, that should get approved after your special exception, that they have to submit it. I flip-flop the intervals on our topo, and that we're gonna require the area, either acres or square footage within the fenced area. And, that the site plan should be a, written commitment of that special exception for, special exception approval if approved. And we'll add some provisions for site, dust control on sites. Cool.
Yeah,
Cool.
good.
All right. So, next one's a big one too. Decommissioning plan. So, I tried to break this into a couple little different sections here. So currently you guys require a decommissioning plan already. And the decommissioning plan, we're just specifying again, it's required to be approved by your commissioner. So that's pretty standard. And then recorded with all applicable deeds of the recorder's office. So, but I did state, and this is a question on the little boxes, decommissioning plan is not required to be submitted with or prior to the development plan application. Because again, a lot of this starts to get into like bonds and some of the estimated costs, those could change if it doesn't get constructed for a couple more months, maybe. This is required, but it doesn't have to be submitted with the decommission or with the special exception or development plan application. Is that what you guys want?
I'd be more comfortable with the decommissioning plan being part of the original submission, that we know where that's laid down and that we've had the BZA look at that. I don't think that and I think some counties are doing this, they actually have the BZA approve the decommissioning plan as part of their approval. But then the actual bond is approved and that amount is established later and approved by the commissioners. I think under by state statute,
because you're not gonna bond.
the
yet.
commissioners are probably gonna have to sign off on the bond anyway. We can't.
Yeah, well, that's what my mind was going, maybe it's a draft plan or something that, because the cost estimates need to come
Yeah,
at that appropriate time, and the bonding needs to come at that appropriate time, as well as some of the insurances that, you know, the general liability insurances and that sort of thing.
but I think the decommissioning plan is such a key part of it that
So
it needs to have a special look by the BZA and it's there.
I'm okay that if you take those few things out, like, you know, in terms of,
Yeah.
not take it out of the decommissioning plan, to say that these pieces of the decommissioning plan need to be submitted, right?
But-
Like how you're gonna restore the site or something like that, but the cost estimates, the bonding, the insurance.
The actual estimate, whatever we decide on what percentage of the project is such and that type of thing, all needs to be part of the original when it comes before the BZA.
So, we have, right now, the time frame that hasn't changed, if it doesn't produce power for 12 months, it needs to be decommissioned. And then, I guess underneath the decommissioning plan, you could require the site restoration plan as part of with special exception, right? The cost and the bond you would not. And then the other sections under that, if I'm following this correctly, the general liability insurance, again, they'll carry some of that, right?
Right.
But not maybe
Yes,
on all that until they pull their building permit, so that might come at the second
Right.
spot too. And then one of the things are your affidavit of responsibility and the binding agreement, so.
We do want to lay out as far as, you know, that how to be calculated, is a third-party registered engineer and so forth.
Yeah, but I guess I'm saying like, so half of these could be in there, but the bonding, the insurance and the cost estimates, you would want that to be approved
Yes.
before you, actually
Mhm.
do your building permits. Okay. So I'll write something on that. Yes to number 1. So it's the site restoration plan. You can do the affidavits and the binding agreement. So 1, 5, and 6. Alright, but the others, we won't. You're not gonna have them bond yet. That wouldn't make sense. I'll leave no, they're gonna be allowed. Okay, so then going through that, Board of Commissioners, I'll update this to. I think ultimately with the Board of Commissioners to approve the decommissioning plan though.
Mhm.
Those pieces can be submitted to the BZA though. So I'm gonna update that, and then, so we basically have that they have to, in that decommissioning plan, they have to include the following at a minimum: site restoration plan. So this is where that 48 inches comes in, as well, that everything has to be restored. Disposal has to meet all of solid waste ordinance, you can't throw it in the sinkhole next door. It's gonna be disposed of as allowed by law. The decommissioning cost estimates, so this is not changed, much other than we put permanent authority, Irish Board of Commissioners, so people know who the permanent authority is, because it is them. If you want to specify exactly how it's gonna be calculated, we can. We did just, the one that did change though is that it does not include the salvage value. So this is the standard kind of language, it's the third-party license, the registered engineer or person suitable experience. Has to be agreed upon, that amount has to be agreed upon now by the commissioners, so.
The only area I question and that I think possibly want to consider changing is just strictly plan includes adequate provisions for removal of all structures and foundations, period, and not even put a depth in.
Okay,
Yeah, I mean, there should not be much that would be below 48 inches anyway, and I think it is
Yeah.
much clearer down the road. How are you gonna argue if
what for you?
if it went 48, if it's still covered by the ground, you'd have to dig it up. And I just think all needs to be removed.
Okay. That's nice, I'll just scratch the 48 inches, but, what about anything on the site restoration plan or the cost estimate? Basically, we're saying again, the engineer or someone who has that experience has to come up with a cost estimate that does not include salvage value, has to be agreed upon by the Board of Commissioners.
Yeah,
Okay.
fine with that. And I agree with taking the, not to include the salvage value.
Yeah, that was the suggestion from you guys.
Yeah, so that-
I removed that.
From what I've read and saw elsewhere, to try to put something in on what salvage is going to be 20, 30 years from now, or even if you're just looking out in 5 year intervals, it's just very difficult to even know what that's going to be.
So the bond did change based on what you guys had asked for last meeting. So basically it's saying that they have to provide that bond, that surety acceptable to the Board of Commissioners. And it has to be, and this is based on what's input from the last time, equal to 120% of the decommissioning cost. The second one, this is trying to respond to you guys, asking for the non-cancelable, kind of like irrevocable kind of bond. The term, and I think Warren, you found too, we probably don't have to do a 5 year, but the term shall be a minimum of 5 years on a non-cancelable or irrevocable basis. If they aren't bonding, they might use some other surety. And for that 5 year period, and renewable at the end of the period for at least 30 years. So that was pulled from some of the information provided. And that written notice shall be provided at least 60 days to the Administrator, Planning Commission, and Board of Commissioners if the surety or the equivalent is not renewed. So if they don't renew their bond, you have 60 days to basically have notice to call that in. The option if not renewed, I know you'd sent me some language on that, and it was basically, we can pull the exact language, but that the surety shall be liable to pay the county in full, the full face value if that bond lapse, or that surety lapse.
I talked to bonding
So-
companies,
And
And
I
there-
got that
And there's
language
a
here.
type of bond, and we may need to iron it down a little bit on the language, but they sent me copies of it, and they said it's one that they normally will issue at this type when required. Basically, at whatever period, whether it's for 1 year, 5 years, or whatever, if,
I think if you-
if the
don't
bond
cancel
is
when
not
it's-
continued on, the county has the option, let's say they stop paying it 10 years or whatever. The county has the option to be able to draw at that time, or the bond company can say, well, we're not going to let you draw because it's not being decommissioned, but we will keep the bond in place regardless, so that it is still there, even though it's not getting paid for until the decommissioning would occur, and then you would be able to draw.
Yeah. And then like the 1 year language, there's something about 1 year, they can extend it for 1 year, or,
Yeah.
I was like, that's unclear.
Yeah.
Do we need to state the term when the 5 years starts?
Yes, we can, let me see here, well, it was in here somewhere.
Thanks,
Well, and so I think what
It is on D.
we've gone back and forth though, is that if we can just do the 1 year, if it's non-canceled,
If it's non-cancelable, the 1 year
the
would
1
be
year is
fine.
just perfectly fine.
Yes,
Because we don't need to,
but we may need to do
Do
some
that.
research on how to get that language correct, that we're being sure that's it.
yeah, and that was the non-cancel, irrevocable is if it's not a bonded surety, it's another type of surety. D does say that, okay, so the bond has to be in place prior to the system producing energy, and the estimated decommissioning cost, is recalculated every 5 years from the date the prior surety was provided. So we provide it, we reassess those costs 5 years from that date.
Is that based on replacement cost when you reassess it?
It's
Or based on the
decommissioning.
depreciated?
It's not, it's only decommissioning, it's to rip it out and make it back to the normal site.
So what's that dollar basis is what I'm asking.
However much it costs to take everything out of the site and restore it back to
To new.
new.
Or what it
To
was.
be in there as opposed to a depreciated, adjusted basis in case the project
there's-
is sold.
No.
No, there's nothing getting depreciated. We're not allowing anything for the scrap value.
Right, so you
being
don't worry about
calculated.
scrap value,
But
so
if the project's sold, leased back, or done something else
None
with it.
of that would affect, none of that would affect it.
We want to make sure that that language is put in there.
Right.
yeah, so it's the cost to take it all out and restore the site. Removing, includes removal of all structures, restoration of soil and vegetation, remove all foundations of that site, so.
The only area that I question that we may want to consider then is, I think the bond should be in place at the time construction starts,
Okay,
Not-
that was, I didn't know.
not at the time it starts producing energy. Because there have been cases to where there's, a great deal of it's in the ground and in place, and the construction
Yep.
came to a halt.
Prior to construction, yep, okay, well, I think that's fine.
Yes, the time of construction. I think, depending on the administration of it, there may be leeway on it, that if we're constructing
Like,
50 acre or 500 acres, that has to have it in place, and when you add the additional 500, it would come into play.
okay, maybe like phased, basically.
Yes, it would be, yes, before the construction starts.
I like phasing it.
Yes.
Yeah. So we'll work, I think we can go to the 1 year, but then we can work in, whether you sent me that information Friday, I think.
Yes.
The non-cancelable or the terminology on that, but basically it can't be canceled. They either let you call it in or they extend the surety, is the idea behind that. So again, let's see here. So that's it under the bonding. And then we do require the general liability insurance, and the county has to be named within that policy. Again, that should be non-cancelable without a 60-day written notice to administrator, planning commission, and the commissioners. So you all will get written notice if they are canceling that policy for whatever reason. The affidavit of responsibility was something that you guys talked about and requested last time, so that's just a signed and notarized affidavit that gets recorded. Basically all property owners, so each property that there is, and if you and somebody own it, all property owners need to sign that, and it's just a statement basically saying that it is ultimately, the responsibility of the property owner to, and the cost is assigned to them even if it's through a separate agreement, basically, I'm the landlord. Ultimately, it's my responsibility to own the property. So the idea with that was just making sure everybody's aware of that. And that they're ultimately responsible for, or liable because it's their property. If they have a different agreement, that's for them and that's a civil matter beyond us.
So beyond us.
We do one that's a binding agreement that the written terms of the decommissioning plan shall state that it's binding upon property owners, operators, as well as any other, any of the future owners of that. And then the compliance section did not change. We did add in the annual permit. So that was just the project owner shall obtain an annual permit in order to operate. The purpose is to ensure continuity of all required insurance and bonding, as well as provide a mechanism to address any pending violations of UDO. The permit is not intended to review the approval of the use and cannot revoke a prior special exception approval. That's highlighted because if it's not a special exception later, I just want to make sure. And the project owner basically by January 1st should just submit their certificate of insurance and then their proof of their bonding. And again, other information like ownership and has there been any changes and that sort of thing. So the intent of that is just an open line of communication and a reminder to submit those documents each year than anything else. But I did want to say it's not reviewing the use itself. Other thoughts on that one?
Fine, everyone else fine on that? Okay,
I had a question on the decommissioning.
go ahead.
You guys are on that in case the decommissioning, if they fail for any reason, and that's to restore the land and to remove all of their improvements. How does that bond work if that's on the private land of that person that leased that?
The county is named as is named within those policies, so.
So the county
They call
collects
that
the
in.
money on a zoning violation.
That's not the same, but yeah. Okay, go ahead.
I'm just asking, how does that work?
A zoning violation, like, so, say I like to use him, because I can pick on him, right? He has he built some shed that's illegal, never pulled a building permit, required a building permit. I as the county issue you a violation, X dollars per day, he pays it, right? That goes into a specific fund within the county.
This is private land though, okay?
Correct, his is private too, yeah.
Okay, so you're gonna collect on them violating, let's say a decommissioning plan goes, the company goes bankrupt. And the decommissioning plan is gone. You guys are gonna collect on that bond and that money stays to the county. It does not in any way benefit the landowner that is the leasing that property to.
It restores their property to prior.
So that bond would restore that private property
Correct.
to its original.
Yeah, and the
But
idea
you're
is that
saying
you don't
here
end
that
up
it
with
does, that
rent.
they're on their own. So I'm confused as to where that line lies at.
The surety, though, the county's not paying for the surety. We're not paying $1 for that.
No, you said that the lease is on their own, the lease.
Yeah, it is.
Right.
Right, we're saying that the surety would pay for restoring the property. If something happens to where that didn't come about, if for some reason we've missed something on the bond and so forth, the property owner is still responsible for the decommissioning on that property regardless.
That just needs to be made clear. I understand
That's,
what you
I think
said,
we've made that very clear in the affidavit statement that we've added to
but
that.
I didn't understand that first off, that the bond would restore it. If they're defunct, they're gone, and we're sitting there with a destroyed field,
Yes.
that bond would restore that.
Yes,
On this, be the first,
yes,
right there.
yes. And
You
it-
call the bond it.
And that's still, now, the area I thought you were getting into, that's a question along the same type of lines is, if we have a zoning violation occur on this property well after the special exception's been issued, one way or the other,
Yeah,
who do we issue the violation against?
but that would be your attorney, but typically you issue the violation to that landowner. Now you also know the leasing, so you can issue that to both of them so they're aware. So I personally do.
It'll be the landowner that
Ultimately,
is
it's the landowner
primarily
who's gonna
responsible.
get notice of that.
The landowner is primarily responsible to us, and then it's up to them what they have in their contracts to be protected from that.
Right,
Okay,
usually,
Who
you just
exactly-
a copy Oh,
Who
no,
exactly is the required annual permit? Who is that submitted to?
We can specify, they
I mean,
can,
it's not specified in
it's
here.
going to, so we'll put it through plan commission. In my mind, it's a PC function.
Yes.
That's a good one.
So is that, like, so is that gonna be the administration at the office to
Yeah.
make sure they reach out to the project owner and say, hey, your annual permit's coming due?
They should be, yeah, knowing to come and do that, yes. But if they don't, if it's, January 15th, you're like, oh, they haven't done it. Yeah, they need to do it, or it's a violation of our ordinances then.
What would happen in a scenario where they didn't have a violation or whatever, didn't get compliant? When we go through the process, we already talked about fines and what have you. And nothing's ever done. I know we have legal action and what have you.
You have to take, your attorney would file suit, file a complaint.
If they're not ever, if they're just non-compliant, we would just go after that. The bond could not, we couldn't,
Correct.
for our fees and fines and whatever, we
No, the bond
can't.
doesn't cover it, it's just.
We couldn't, I know it doesn't, but could there be something added to make sure that those things, because we're looking at a large project.
I don't know, that would be a question for the planning commission attorney for sure, but typically how you issue that violation. Give them a certain period to respond, if they're not responding, then your attorney is going to file suit in court and the judge is gonna, determine how that lays at the end of the day.
I just
And
don't
that's
want
how
to
you
get tied up
recoup
in
those
court
fees.
for 10 years or whatever, and there's gotta, like I always say, if it doesn't have teeth, it's not much of a law, rule, or an ordinance, and, it's gotta be something that they're gonna be more than compelled to stay compliant.
Yeah, and I think your fines, and remind me, I'll look at Warren if you remember, we can look it up if not. They're the maximum allowed by state statute, which is 2,500 IUs per occurrence per day. So if, in theory, you have 8 parcels that have a violation of some sort, that's 8 occurrences per day, and that can be fined.
But that's nothing, just
So
thousands.
then you bring it to court and the judge says thou shalt. I mean, that's where it comes down to a judge's ruling. I've sat through one where then they didn't comply with the judge, and it's contempt of the court then, and that's
That would be
That's a
like
jail.
a letter of credit or something else that you could secure.
And that's where I'd say I would talk to
We're
your
gonna
attorney.
put
if they're doing that
with the
to
fine
anybody else.
side and so forth, we've got a fairly strong enforcement side on that.
Yeah.
I understand.
That's where I feel like enforcement is the key. You can't just let it sit. You've got an issue about, you've got to send them the violation and then follow up on that.
Patrick here, but at fines, we just, so how do we collect them? Do we just put it on the property taxes? Or do we have to?
That's where if they're not paying those,
You go back after the judgment's been entered,
judges.
then there's a separate legal process that deals with the ability to be able to collect the fines and how to collect them.
So it wouldn't be, it wouldn't be on the property owners, it would be on who's off.
No, it would be on the property owners in this case. It'd be on the
But
property
ultimately,
owners.
when you name that suit, I'm gonna guess your attorney's gonna name the property owner and the operator on that suit.
Yes.
And then the judge
And
is
they're
gonna,
bankrupt, and they're gone.
the judge is gonna make that determination on
Yeah.
who to go after. So I feel like the enforcement is key though, so that's why this gentleman here is such a key member, right? You gotta enforce these things, but then your attorney is a key member too, because you can't just be like, slap on the wrist, shame, and then not do anything. You're gonna follow it up with some sort of legal action or else. Again, because they have more power of contempt of court, and you don't follow the judge's ruling, go to jail. So that's where it really gets easier.
We've spent 2 hours this evening. How much time did you want to allocate for this evening? Or were we at a point to where we're getting into some major issues that we need to be sure that we have time at another meeting? Because we're getting into some of the meat and bones.
The biggies are back here, setbacks seem to always be the biggest point of discussion.
You've got the drive.
Yeah, that's
I'll leave it up
not
to
a
you
worry.
this evening.
I don't know how much you're gonna get through. I think if you want to at least touch on the topics, that's fine. I'll do whatever you guys want by all means, but,
Do I need to hold a question on decommissioning till later?
I'm gonna let.
No, go ahead and ask your question on decommission.
On
That's what you-
decommissioning, they say they're gonna restore the soil
Mhm.
to its how it was prior to all this. Are you requiring soil tests for contaminants? Are you requiring some type of soil compaction test? Because everything I read said it takes at least 3 to 5 years of deep ripping of the soil to get rid of the compaction. And during that time, you lose 20 to 40% of your crop yield.
No, generally, we're not going into that detail, and I'll elaborate a little bit as why. The role of the plan commission, the ordinances and so forth is to protect the adjoining property owners. It is not necessarily our position to be putting things in that protects that property owner that chose to lease his ground to the solar from the solar people. If they end up with ground afterwards that produces 50% of the crop that they did before, that's not directly affecting the adjoining property owners. It affects them. That was their business decision, their job to deal with it within their own property as such.
Okay, so if the surrounding property owners, if they want to protect their rights, they've got to have their soil tested prior. Then they have to have it tested post because of the runoff from those fields of PFAS, silica, lead, cadmium. Who's gonna take care of that adjoining property owner who wanted nothing to do with it, but
Well,
now
there's-
got that on slate?
There seems to be a great deal of debate, and from everything that has been presented to this point, there's not been evidence been presented that on the type of solar panels that are being used today, that they have the runoff and the contamination from the PFAS and so forth on the adjoining ground. I'm not an expert on that, but I'm just, it's been presented both ways. And if there can be more evidence brought in brought into that, there's going to be a time for that at the BZA hearing, which is separate from what we're doing this evening. Yeah. But generally, the idea is that it would restore it, and you want it visually be proper instead of left a mess, so it's not affecting the adjoining property owners, and we're limiting it at that. You know, it's the same type of thing. We can't do anything if somebody plants the ground for 5-10 years and doesn't fertilize it or doesn't rotate crops. They did the damage to themselves, basically.
I have a question.
Yes.
So if we're gonna talk about protecting the non-participating landowners in the construction phase, what's protecting them for any damage to their properties through drainage, drainage ditch, waterways, field piles, or any other infrastructures that caused from their construction or even just maintenance up there?
Legal would probably have to give a little better answer on that than me, but they would have recourse against the company that does the damage, so on and so forth. There, some during constructions in Posey County, they've set up a 24-hour hotline to where if there's a problem being caused, it can be caused and it's addressed by the people that are doing construction and the actual
Right,
owner of the
put it in
project.
this though, that the companies.
Do you know of any way to address?
In those repairs?
Well, during the construction period, as far as if there's any damage done to adjoining property owners' property, they're wanting to look to see if there's some type of safety provision.
So I know like from a drainage standpoint, that would typically be a drainage board who would address that. If they are increasing drainage or something of that nature, so that's where that typically would house, and I point that way because I'm brain at the moment. Sorry about it. Tell you that drainage board is out, he's working on it, he's trying to get it looked out. But you're the only one here, so I'm picking on you, sorry, David. But outside of that, like if they, I don't know, ran over your mailbox, right, or something of that nature, that would be the same as if anyone else had done property damage to you.
Right, but we just talked about how protecting the roads and stuff with these ordinances. I mean, other counties have put in ordinances to protect the non-participating landowners and the drainage that may affect them from construction.
I think the drainage definitely, and that's where I guess I would try to make sure that's included within the drainage board purview. And if it's not, then we can put something in here. But in terms of property damage of like, hitting a structure or something of that nature, like that might feel, you don't enforce that on anything else.
I'm more concerned like if they're moving the land around and
Yeah, they all
of a sudden now the
like,
neighbors fields are flooded and
like
their
all of a sudden
livestock
you get a
can't
funnel
use
of
it.
like.
Right, exactly, that's what I'm sure
towards you.
you're not.
David, is that something that your drainage ordinance is going to address?
Yeah.
So if it's addressed there,
Pre-construction, post-construction.
correct, your pre and post can't
Well,
be different.
And our drainage, the drainage plan that they're going to submit before we give approval is going to address the
Drainage
certain.
plan would go to the drainage board typically,
Right, right, I
right?
understand.
So they would, again, when you have your drainage board, all of that just gets defaulted to the drainage board because it's their power and duty as a drainage
So the
board.
drainage board then can hold them liable or.
Correct, and they would have their own way of doing fines per day, just like the plan commission would be able to. Yeah,
Because if that's occurring, I
It's not
understand,
hard.
you need someone else that's helping go to bat with you than it just be the individual complaining to the company about it if it's on drainage that's coming across.
I mean, a lot of times when that
like
happens,
Cozy County, where the people were stuck.
Well, I don't know particulars.
a lot of times when those do happen, there's a land use violation too with it, so I've been on where they're getting fines from the plan commission and the drainage board concurrently. So again, but that would be whether it's, anybody does that to you then. But my understanding is it's taken care of in your drainage ordinance, so that's why it's not here.
I know there's another county that has language in there about the damage. And theirs says, that it'll be completely repaired to original or better condition and not to impede the flow of water.
So we include in that maintenance, section 8, if you remember that. I mean, it broadly does, this talks about public infrastructure though. It's the
Yeah, I don't-
damages to waterways, drainage ditches, field tiles, and other related infrastructure, including the processing required permitting or review of the county's outside contracted engineer.
It just doesn't say to be repaired to the original or better condition.
I know number 8
Yeah, I
on,
mean, that doesn't have the language though, right?
it does say that it has to must be prepared by the project order owner or remedied with the installation of new drainage infrastructure that is approved by the Jefferson County Drainage Board. So it's whatever the board approves, they're not gonna approve anything lesser, I'm saying. All repairs must be approved by the drainage board and completed within a reasonable timeline that's specified by the drainage board. That's on topic number 8, like the previous set, the last page of that. And then we do the same thing to public infrastructure for like roads, rights of way, and all of that stuff. But it's all public because that's what you own, you don't own, the county doesn't own the rest. And private parcels. I think that's what you were getting at, right, Lana? Here, you wanna see, I have it out here.
Yeah, I saw it.
I found it. I mean, that's where I think you were going with the drainage, I mean, the repairs and stuff, right?
Well, when I brought it up last time when we met, because I thought it was important to have the language in there that be repaired to the original or better condition. It was
Okay.
mentioned that we won't put that language in there because it's basically a civil suit, because if your neighbor now does something, you wouldn't do that. But I see it as when I'm done with an industrial solar project next to me that costs and damage, that's just not my typical neighbor. That's a multi-million-dollar company, if not a billion-dollar company. So why could we not hold them to the standard of repair this to the original better condition?
Do you wanna specify the section on topic number 8, that's just public infrastructure, so that's because that's what the county owns, so it's public infrastructure that we were talking about. We can put to better or, same or better, and must be approved by the drainage board. The discussion last time was kind of, the drainage board isn't gonna approve something that's substandard repair. Right, and so it is the highway department.
I wouldn't think so, but I think.
But we can put that in just as a super, it's equivalent, the same or better.
Well,
We can definitely put that in, but the intention, I think, was the boards are gonna have to approve it, so.
let's go on and see if we can get through topic 12 yet this evening.
Okay, so I'm gonna make that one on number 8, topic number 8.
Okay.
Flowers. Okay, so then 12 was, where are they gonna go? So we did look and pull in, again, the definitions here, because that makes a difference. So again, it's accessory, or now it is considered commercial. So you'll notice that these kind of got consolidated. So the idea here is when we talk about the uses, that accessory is intended, that's energy that's intended for on-site use. So it's a house that has some solar panels, right? Or it could be your industrial building that puts panels, on the roof or whatnot. Oxmoor Mall has like 20-something acres of panels on their roof. That's used for on-site. It's intended for on-site use. And it also specifies now, the definition was specified that BESS, which is battery energy storage systems, are a separate use. So BESS is not considered part of that. It'd be a separate use. With the direction we got from the last meeting. So the commercial is, again, it's intended to be produced primarily for off-site. It's the ones that are tying into our grid system, right? It's not meant to power my house or my business. So, and then we did specify that, again, BESS isn't considered a separate use with a separate approval. That was the direction from that last one. We also did specify the commercial ones. They include everything, including your reflector devices, all solar related equipment, other accessory buildings and structures, light reflectors, your heat exchangers, your substations, your electrical infrastructure, transmission lines, and other structures. So all of that is considered this use. So with those kind of consolidating those definitions, we can look at where we permit those. So currently it's not a permitted use in any district, right? So you can't just come in and do it as permitted use. That I would say the same. Special exception use currently is permitted as a special exception in ag, I1, I2. And then in your business districts, if it's less than 10 acres. So within your neighborhood and your general business district, if it's less than 10 acres. So the idea is to just go ahead and not worry about the accessory ground mounted, because now we're just talking about primary or commercial. So, and this is just commercial. So we're proposing that we basically leave that the same, unless you guys want to change that. I was just striking for accessory ground mounted because at that point it's a moot point. The only thing I think you could do is, I don't know if it's really applicable in your neighborhood business anyway. If it's less than 10 acres, it's not going to be commercial solar because it's not big enough. So I don't know. The commercial districts are probably a moot point in my mind. So the question is, I think the big question is ag. In my mind, I don't like things getting rezoned to industrial. I don't like thousands of acres possibly getting rezoned to industrial. That could then be a whole lot of things, right? They could be a whole lot, everything that's a permitted use, unless that rezoning has a written commitment and it's enforced, that you can only do certain uses. So that's always my fear of rezoning what is an agricultural area to an industrial district versus doing it as a special exception. It still is a public process and a public hearing, but it doesn't ultimately allow all of those industrial uses in the area too. So that's just my that's my, again, I think the best practice from my perspective, but obviously people do it in a lot of different ways. So it's a local decision.
Well, if we weren't going to keep it just as a special exception, we'd have to establish a completely new zoning district.
That's what we've done at some, is like a renewable energies district that gets, a handful of these things in there. And then it's permitted within that district. It's not on the map though, so it would have to go through a rezoning process.
And then if it gets zoned, then if it gets, that zoning changes to that, then we would also have to come up with a set of regulations of what else is allowed in that
You
district.
make it very minimal things, like
Yes.
in my mind.
And you would
Only
end
done
up,
that some
you would
places.
end up with spot zoning of, it's not like all this 1,000 or 2,000 acres is gonna be in one group. You would hit this parcel, that parcel, and
Yeah, and well, there's a different process. So rezonings go through planning commission
Commission.
with a recommendation to your legislative body, which is commissioners. Your special exceptions go through BZA, which is quasi judicial, and it's supposed to be, again, more independent, if that makes sense.
it doesn't come under some of the political pressures.
In theory, it shouldn't. You can't contact BZA members about a petition. That's illegal. By state statute, that's illegal. You can contact plan commission and commissioners about those. Again, it's not a right or wrong, it's just how you want to deal with it locally. I personally tend to like to do the special exception route because I don't wanna rezone that many acres to
Industrial.
industry, because it allows a lot of other things that probably are not appropriate
Right.
potentially. So, but those both allow for the public process in there.
I'm comfortable with leaving it as a special
That's up to
exception.
you
And
guys.
we agree with that. Rest.
And this is out there, but I'm gonna say it. What if it's just not allowed to be rezoned in ag period?
So that's
Your
forcing
ag
it
is ag.
to an industrial district then.
Yes,
So
it's a
it's
special exception.
Which is,
So you have to rezone it, but so you're still gonna have to rezone.
no, you just don't put it on there.
Thousands.
Rezone what?
So if say you had making 1,000 acres, right, that wanted to be solar, right? And it's zoned anything right now, it's zoned R1, or it could be ag, or it could be zoned commercial, right? They would have to go through, they would request a rezoning to industrial then, so the same. You're still gonna get a request for a couple thousand acres to be rezoned to industrial.
But
They would rezone and then they get a special exception.
in Spencer County, they just put a thing through ordinances for the commissioners. And their main thing is regulating the location of commercial solar energy systems in non-residential areas, brownfields, and non-prime farmland. So I think that would cover it.
But you still have to either set up a process, is it a rezoning or is it a special exception?
Nothing
No,
but it's agricultural.
Because, okay, say you say it's just a special exception in industrial, right?
No, they're saying only write in the ordinance just to write it that it can only go on non-residential areas, brownfields and prime farmland. They're
So
saying
from the
get-go,
ordinance
regulate.
perspective, though, it has to be a district. We have to pick a district where it belongs or does not belong, right?
Did.
So, and I'll look at, if you have it, I will look at it, because it would specify, that might be the purpose of that, the overall purpose, but it has to be a permitted or special exception use. We can't just say it's, you can put it in any other place.
You can, because I talked to, the Representative Zimmerman from North Vernon, and he said that that's exactly where it should go.
Where it should go, right, but what zoning districts then is it permitted in? That could still be a purpose of that, right? A location criteria or something within that, but we have to, within the zoning ordinance, we have to say where it's permitted. If we just say it should go on these places,
Well,
it
they
doesn't tell
also,
us where it legally can go from a zoning.
they also have a stipulation that it can only be 200 acres. And within so many miles, it could be like 2 parcels, but it could only cover 200 acres. So if you haven't read theirs, you need to read
I
it.
have, and I just don't know what districts it's in.
Much more comprehensive.
Wait a minute, so the thing is, though, they still would specify somewhere later what districts it's in.
Commercial, industrial.
They might have made their own district, like I said, like a renewable energy district or something. It still
I
needs
know ours
to.
changed, I'm trying to think which law.
I mean,
I just don't have it at the tip of my fingers.
No,
But can
usually
anybody
bring mine, but I
ask
didn't.
for, I mean, when let's say it is like what you're saying, but they can still go in and ask for a zoning change.
Correct.
That's
That's
what
what
I
I'm
think,
getting at.
they're still gonna ask that process. And
You have to
so
make
they're still
it
gonna have to go through some kind of public process. We can put that stipulation, like what you're wanting or mentioning, but they can still put it where they want, but they'll have to come in and ask the tour zoning process change.
And so that's where, like, we have, it can't be on floodplains, it can't be on,
And they cover
wetlands,
it.
like, we have that as, it cannot be, so it doesn't matter what district. That doesn't specify a zoning district, it just says, you can't put solar on a floodplain, you can't put solar on, a wetland, right? So,
That's what she was saying. Put it there, you can't put it on prime
Right.
farmland.
okay, well, that's, that was the previous section we were looking at, this section is zoning district specifically. So that's why I think that we have to specify a zoning district as well.
It says
Previously, we had put, where was it, which section was
they
it?
used zoning districts designated I1 and I2.
Thank you.
After being zoned industrial, a special exemption shall be applied for regards to operations of theirs is greater than 20 acres.
Okay, so yes, I1, I2 is the permitted districts, which is what we're specifically talking about. We do have in here, and I'm trying to remember where we put it now. It was in today's thing then.
What county was that again?
This is Spencer County.
Spencer.
That it cannot be within floodplains. And you've had it digital, so I can hit control mine, don't worry, hit this. We previously said they can't be the floodplains, we could, if the plan, if you guys want to, we can add whatever you want. But that's where you would add that, not as a zoning district, that's not, you know what I mean? It'd be the I1 or I2 or ag, that's what topic number 12 that we're on is specifically talking about zoning districts. So,
Well, and under their zoning standards, they have the acreage coverage of utility scale solar facilities shall be a maximum of 200 acres. And no utility scale solar facility shall be located within 2 miles of another existing or permitted utility scale solar facility unless the combined acreage coverage is 200 acres or less. So we need things like that so that we don't get these conglomerates in these hot zones.
and that's something that was not, like when we did our list of topics, that was not a topic that
I
came up in the previous meeting.
I think though what has came up, and I think we're probably at a good point to probably break it for this evening. But I do think that we need to add a topic for our next meeting after we can finish with these two or come back, because I do think there needs to be some topic discussion as to regards to the what size solars we're going to be willing to
Like the cap.
cap. There's several different, there's approaches they've done to where a certain size and then there has to be separation from others, or whether that going to decide that a certain percentage of ground within the county can be as such. There seems to be some legal questions as to what will hold up and so forth. And then I'd comment as well that I don't want to criticize another county's ordinances particularly, but all of these ordinances that are being done are relatively new, and the solar is relatively new. And when I ask questions, there seems to be a little bit of concern yet as to what's going to hold up in legal challenges and what will not hold up in legal challenges. So as we move through that, we definitely want to protect on the legal side and be sure that we can balance that, because some of these communities have been tied up in legal actions now for 3-5 years as such, and that gets to be very, very expensive for a county. And we want to avoid that if at all possible. But I do think that we, we'll call it quits for this evening, but we need to add the items that are being brought up.
On the cap separation
Right.
thing, and then we can revisit back to like.
Is there any, are there other
floodplains
topics
and that
along
sort
those
of thing.
lines
That's
that
where we put
that
that.
you're wanting to see discussed as well?
Just solar panels, because you talked about the newer ones, putting a requirement to have them UL certified, because that would address slave labor, China, supplies. And it would, same as anything else that you're buying here, would be UL certified. So something to look into.
Right, there's many products that come from overseas that are UL certified. That UL certification does not mean that it would be built in the US.
It doesn't mean that it was there, but it is an extra assurance there. So if we can look into that, I'll try to get through.
We can look in to see if there's any particular spec or something that we should require on the panel itself.
Have you addressed, I wonder, you may have addressed it, and didn't really address it tonight. Distance from the residential property,
That's topic we have not, we didn't, it's topic number
Right.
14.
okay, and
We made it to 12. We're almost there.
okay. Also wells.
Wells.
We have a well, and when they put these pilings in, it can mess your whole well system up. And on their ordinance in Spencer County, they have like a 2 mile for residential, commercial, industrial, or artisan wells. That these are not supposed to be within a 2 mile radius. So that's something that's really important, because that's our lifeline.
We'll need to look at that. I am not sure what the conditions are in Posey. We can take a look and
That
see,
was
but
Spencer.
I mean Spencer as such. Posey, I've heard complaints as such, it's on the deal. Water tables and so forth can be much, much different in those areas than what we're dealing with. I'm finding from my knowledge is limited, and I'm more than willing to look into it, but I don't think we're gonna find that driving a piling down or digging a ditch 48 inches or 12 is going to affect wells in this area. I just do not. The aquifer is not going to tie in and affect that here compared to what some of those areas may have. But that's something that we can consider and have some discussion on at our next. Not able to give you a date for that meeting right now. There is the BZA is scheduled to have their hearing on this current solar application that's before them. And I think there's a possibility, I don't know if they will reach a decision that evening or decide that they want to schedule a meeting shortly after that. And until I know what their schedule is going to be, it's a little difficult for us to continue. And then with the moratorium that's currently in place, we didn't have that at our last meeting when we met. There's not the huge rush to push through for the next meeting. Yeah. Anything else from the board?
So I'll just follow up with you this morning.
What's that?
I can just follow up with you,
All right.
what you want to do.
When you-
But if you review those others and have thoughts, like feel free to send it in, I'll add in my comments like I did with Warren, just so it's, or, you know, anybody else's, so then it's just there for everybody.
All right, appreciate you all coming this evening.
Whatever.